Welcome to RomingerRadio. This is Carl Rominger. Talk line number 717-916-5189. So if you've got something you want to say, you want to sound off or be heard, 717-916-5189. If it's your first time joining the show, go to carlrominger.com, KarlRominger, for more information about me and what's going on here. But basically, it's a talk radio show where we answer your questions, engage in discussion about political events and what's going on in the world. And most recently, this past Wednesday, of course, we talked a lot about Bo Bergdahl. I'd be happy to pick up where we left off there. If anybody has some opinions on Bo Bergdahl and or his situation, I'm going to be talking about those again tonight as well. And again, Obama and his prisoner swap, was it the right choice, wrong choice? What do you think and why? 717-916-5189. This isn't a family show, so, you can't use coarse language, though, because I just won't let you, because we do want it to be playable to the human ear, and so we're looking for higher discourse and not just, sounding off and yelling like an idiot. But so far we haven't had that problem, so I haven't had to cut anybody off. 717-916-5189 is the talk line number. Be sure and jump on here if you have an opinion you want to share, and I know a few of you do because I know you're planning on calling. I saw in the New York Times and a couple other news sources it being reported now that according to the military, Bo Bergdahl is telling them about various harsh treatments he received while in captivity, which sounds a lot like basic forms of torture and or isolation, including being locked up in a cage in the dark to be punished for attempting to leave. So I'm wondering if people are beginning to rethink perhaps the fact that he isn't going to be given or hasn't so far been given a warm embrace by the American public, but instead is being known as a, quote, traitor, end quote. I'm not sure if that's a fair assumption until we know more information. And, of course, we're going to have to know why he wandered off his post when he did and see if that was what was really happening. And, of course, there seems to be this insidious argument, well, he disappeared and then mysteriously the roadside bombs become more accurate, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know, but I'd like to know what you think about it, 717-916-5189. Do you think Bo Bergdahl's getting a fair shake? Do you think he's being mistreated by the public? What do you think, 717-916-5189? Or has Obama made the John Boehner of the century and traded 5 ruthless terrorists for what's essentially a traitor to the United States? I don't see it that way because whether it's a traitor or not is a separate question. Anytime a soldier was overseas and the government wanted to say, hey, we're just going to allow this guy to stay overseas and we're not going to worry about bringing him home, all they would need to do is plant some story that the guy was a traitor or he walked off, or have somebody from his unit come out in public and say, he was a traitor and we shouldn't trust him and he really defected to the other side, so he's not really a prisoner of war. The American public, it seems in my mind, by allowing the assumption to automatically be that you shouldn't be brought home because of those factors, sets it up for abuse in the future. That's how I feel about it. 717-916-5189. Excuse me. Basically saying, hey, we just want to, get over the politics of not bringing one of the boys home. So those 3 guys that were captured over in that other country, we're just going to go ahead and have a little CIA counterintelligence operation spin that they were actually traitors. We'll manufacture a little evidence. We'll get one of the guys from the unit to swear out an affidavit. And based on what I've seen with Bo Bergdahl, if that was done, everybody in America would be fine with him simply rotting over there. I really think that. The other thing I posted on the internet, and I know some people are like, well, how can this be a topic? Well, one of the things I posted was a picture that's running around on Twitter. And it reminds me of pictures I'm seeing on Twitter all the time. It's a picture of Hitler and Obama together and basically sort of making a speech where they both say forward and arguing that there's no difference between the two. My question for you is comparing President Obama to Hitler a viable comparison, and if so, why? And if not, why? Do you think it's okay for people to easily associate the current president, whoever that president may be, with Adolf Hitler, for instance, and or do you think that's polite discourse, appropriate discourse? I mean, if we talk about free speech, of course you can do what you want. But I'm curious to see what people's reactions to it are. I've noticed that they travel very well on Twitter, and they travel very well on Facebook, and in fact get repeated often when they're posted. I think it's the visceral emotional reaction that they create. And those who, really hate Obama just love retweeting the idea that Obama and Hitler are in the same picture and that they're really one and the same. In fact, I think the caption on it says basically same song, meaning that, we're still hearing the same tune. Now, we had some good comments on Facebook about that, including one person who said, well, it really is the same song because everybody likes to compare their current king or their current president or their current leader, I think they use the word king, to, the most reviled people in history, if that's a comparison they want to make. In other words, that we all tend to, if we don't like our current leader, see them in the current eyes as horrible or evil or bad. And, of course, the judgments of history may turn out to be quite different. In fact, the judgment of history sometimes has popular leaders turning out to be despots later. So I'm not always sure how that will work. Now, some people will say I'm crazy for saying that Obama might not be a despot. And I'm always amused by the fact, for instance, I saw a post, and I'll tell you my reply, but the post was basically, Obama works 24/7 to destroy America. And my reply was, well, maybe 23 hours a day. And I sort of chuckle because I don't think that Obama is in the White House just sitting around going, how can I destroy America? What is America? I don't know. That's going to be the ideal. So if you have a certain ideal and he has a different ideal, I don't think he sits around and says, how can I destroy the country? And I don't think he sits around and says, how can I make America weaker intentionally? Do I think he's doing those things? Well, that's a separate question. But I just don't think he's sitting around doing it. But I could be naive. So if you get some inside line on that and you can tell me, maybe this is part of the Weather Underground's secret campaign to take control of the White House, and Bill Ayers is really telling Obama what to do on a daily basis. He did write his book for him, I'm told. 717-916-5189 if you guys want to get in on the conversation. We'll pop you right here on the air, and we can talk about, like I say, Obama. We can talk about Bergdahl. We can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. It's a little of everything, as you know. And I'm happy to talk with you here on the air about it. I know maybe we'll have the great Don Stevens grace our show later tonight. He's always a hoot. And I've got a few little pre-planned uploads that I'm going to play for you at some point so that I can take a break during the 3 hours. As I've told you before, 3 hours of talk radio is really 4 hours of terrestrial talk radio here on the internet. So when we do it in this format, I do need a little break once in a while, and I will use that for that purpose. And I'll give you a heads up so you know it won't be live from it. That way the stream won't be interrupted. I really want to know what you guys think about it. And go to Facebook.com, go to the Carl Rominger Show, and take a look at the Hitler comparison. The exact quote is, the song remains the same. And, of course, Hitler saying, Voswarts, I don't know. Am I saying that right? Vorwarts, forward. And, and they look like strident. They both are kind of, got the fist clenched and the mouth open and the strong, passionate speech. I'm not sure I agree the comparison is 100% fair. On the other hand, I'm not completely sure that it's not unfair to say that all politicians use emotion and all politicians use less than fair techniques to extol the populace in the direction they want them to go, often disingenuously. So, when Hitler said that the Jews were evil and bad, he was lying but getting an effect out of it. And when President Obama said, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your hospital, you can keep your insurance, he was lying, but he was doing it to get an effect out of it, which was support for what he wanted to do. Now, the magnitude of lies and the scope of the harm caused are two very different things in those scenarios. So I'm not saying they're one and the same, but I'm saying that's what politicians do. They jerk emotional chains. And post-World War I, Europe, which had been created by the nature of the war, left the German people susceptible to Hitler's arguments, which also reminds me of another little meme around this topic of memes and pictures on the internet. There's a picture of, some Nazis rounding up some Jews, and of course it says, because first we took your guns and now we're going to take you. Well, there's a little bit of a fallacy here. There's a belief somehow that Adolf Hitler rounded up all the guns and left the German populace, including the Jewish population, without firearms to defend themselves. The reality is the disarmament of Germany took place under the prior government to Hitler, which was a democratically elected Weimar Republic. So to say that the Nazis will take your guns and that's what happens when they start taking the guns, that's what's going to happen, isn't exactly a true argument. The way it would be better said is fascists and people like the Nazis cannot take control and will not take control until the people are fully or sufficiently disabled in their ability to stand up to them. And so it's very difficult for somebody to take over a country and or have a coup, sort of like the Nazis did, where they basically just took over the government and changed it into an authoritarian regime from a republic by the way, getting democratically elected initially, right? So, and that could happen here. And that's why I always say when people say, oh, nothing like that could ever happen here. Once the right people seize the reins of power, and once they have control of those reins of power, they can utilize them in a way that we wouldn't necessarily envision at first blush. And so all I say is that the loss of firearms and the loss of guns, and I'm always happy to talk about gun topics, by the way, but the loss of firearms and the loss of guns would, in my mind, be right up there with the next step to getting towards a totalitarian regime. And could it be a communist regime? I don't know. I also noticed on the internet, and I'm backed up by an article that I found in The Economist, which I actually read in my paper issue of The Economist. Of course, it's the April edition, some point in April. The Onion actually ran an article one time that said that The Economist had agreed to stop publishing for a month so that the readers could catch up. If you've ever read The Economist, you'll find that funny because it's so dense and it takes so long to read. And hell, every time you get halfway through one, the week's over and the next one's in your hands. They had an article about Europe's far-right leaders being very friendly to Putin and very pro-Putin in very many levels. Well, I saw on the Facebook and on the Twitter a picture of Vladimir Putin basically saying something about Sharia law, and it was being pushed around with a basic caption that said, "I wish my president sounded like this." Basically, interesting that American conservatives are saying that they wish their president sounded more like Vladimir Putin. Now, is Putin playing the lines that he plays because he truly believes them, or is that part of his trick of authoritarian rule and to use his newfound interest in the Christian church? Russia has traditionally, as we remember it from our younger days, been anti-religious, right? They were going to kill off God. That was Stalin, and they were just going to get rid of God. There would be no God anymore. And now, instead, the new communist regime under Putin embraces and protects the Russian Orthodox Church as a source of nationalism. And so it's interesting that right-wing people throughout the world, and I'm not saying right-wing in a bad way, but are actually willing to flirt with the idea that somehow Putin is more admirable to them than a democratically elected leader in the United States or Europe. I think some of that is kind of, fantasy. In other words, I wish my president was a totalitarian, authoritarian. Well, that goes back to the whole concept of, the whole world could be straightened out if somebody could just tell everybody what to do. And we all know the president doesn't really have that power. I mean, he or she could theoretically make things happen, but they have the power to control everything. And in a democratic system, a lot of what the president wants just never gets done because there's too many ways Congress or the courts can prevent it from happening, or there's too much bureaucratic inertia and political red tape to cut through. Well, that makes us seek or want in our heads this sort of strong totalitarian leader, right? This mythical Leviathan. I don't know who would be the epitome, what do I want? Alexander the Great to come riding in on his horse, swing his sword around, and all of a sudden all the world is better. Well, that kind of mythical or magical thinking is what attracts people to this idea of Putin as somehow as a hero or a demigod to look up to at some level. But I think when they stop and really think about it, do I really want a guy like that running my country? So I don't know. If you're out there and you think that you would rather have Putin as president of the United States than Obama, I'd be curious to hear about that. 717-916-5189. Again, the talk line number 717-916-5189. We'll pop you in on the air here and hear what you have to say. I wonder if anybody could intellectually do that. Could you intellectually support the proposition that Putin should be the president of the United States over Obama? I think that would be a very interesting argument. I'd be happy to take it on behalf of keeping Putin not as president of the United States But I'm sure you're going to hurl a lot of like Obama problems at me, which you could easily say Putin would do better at this or better at that. And then, of course, the question is, would Putin attack the fundamentals of America the same way many people somehow think Obama is? And again, I'm not an Obama sympathizer. Those of you that know me know I'm very critical of much that he does. I just don't think he sits around the White House and plots and cajoles his staff and Congress to figure out how to end the political system here in America or how to turn us into a third world country. Not saying that the healthcare reform and some of the other economic things, the 10-10 minimum wage, for instance, that we wouldn't end up there, the third world nation. Although I think middle-class American Republicans are just as in favor of bankrupting the United States as anybody else, because we all want our Medicare, we all want our Social Security, we all want our benefits, and we all want to keep moving forward with those nice, fun things. So I think that's a real issue. I mean, I can't say for 100% sure that we'll bankrupt the country that way, but my impression is that we'll be joining Greece soon if we continue to not cut back on public spending. And one of the big areas, as I've said before, is Medicare. In fact, Medicare, Social Security, and defense make up huge portions of the budget. And I always get these guys on Facebook, well, I just got to stop giving welfare to these welfare queens. Well, if you got rid of all the welfare queens, we still wouldn't be terribly better off. Caller, you're on the Carl Rominger Show. The talk line number is 717-916-5189. What's going on, caller?
Hey, how you doing, Carl? It's Dwayne.
Hey, Dwayne. How are you?
Good. I'm out there trying to spread the word.
Well, thank you very much.
Been out on Facebook cruising around. Hey, I've been hearing what you've been saying about do I want Putin more than I want Obama? Absolutely. There's a side of that man I really like.
And that's that's what's interesting. I think, and I was kind of saying, I don't think we really want him as president. It's the idea of, this guy swaggering in who just says, this is the way we're going to do it and we're going to make it work. And also, he's looked pretty clever lately, the way he's outrunning the rest of the world. He's outmaneuvered everybody so far.
Right. And I like the man because he reminds me of to the point, big balls, don't care, just, tell you what he's thinking.
Well, the other thing
reminds me of that kind of guy.
Well, he's also very clever about his public image. In other words, Putin and his people massage his image. And so, for instance, they make sure that he's without a shirt fishing somewhere or riding a horse, because he's got the physique for it, that manly look that you can get away with. They make sure that there's a lot of like press releases over there with him like saving animals and going down underwater in submarines. And he has a real strongman image. He does it a little bit more deftly, though, than Kim Il-jung used to do, like when they claimed that he had golfed and he was like, he had 7 holes in one in an 18-hole round. But some of what Putin is not really what he is. It's what he projects through a very sophisticated media apparatus.
Which is probably the part that I'm seeing and why I'm kind of impressed with the man. Yeah,
and that's what I say. Now, and of course, there's also this temptation, and so if you watch the movie Gladiator for your history, you might even know this. But if you have better source of history than Gladiator, you may be aware of this as well. But the Romans struggled between, should we be a democracy run by the Senate, or do we want a strong emperor dictator to come in and sort of clear up things and run the place efficiently? And at some points, the Roman Senate was in charge, and at other points through Roman history, the Senate lost its power either to an emperor or a dictator or a triumvirate. But nonetheless, it was interesting interplay the Romans always had between trying to decide what's better, a strong man or the people deciding. And they both have their advantages at certain levels. I mean, in a time of immediate crisis, rule by committee can paralyze. When it's not an immediate crisis, though, sometimes the dictator is not so benign as to simply let go and say, okay, let's get back to a general consensus of rule here. They still want to tell you what to do and when to do it.
Right. I mean, and there'd be nothing wrong with a true dictatorship if you had the right person and if the person had the people's best interest in mind.
Well, and that's interesting because now we're kind of getting back into, the political philosophy. And as you go back in time and go through the different political philosophers, that was the notion of the Leviathan, the idea that you could have a government and dedicate, sign in the social contract into a form of government. And the idea that a leader could be just, but once you pick your just leader, as the power goes, and of course I think it was Hobbes, once you entered into the social contract, you were stuck with what you got. And over time, if that leadership changed or their succession went down the road, you were sort of just still stuck. They didn't really recognize under that regime this idea of a mechanism to purge the government, which is always, an interesting question, because if we went on the air here today and I said, well, we're at the turning point where we need to take up guns and, take down our government, that would be a call to action that would not be well received. But our founding fathers, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, were basically saying, hey, now that you've gone too far, we're going to set up our own political regime here. And that was actually sedition, right?
I'd say, where do I join?
Right. And so, of course, in the hypothetical. And here's the problem. The world is filled with sympathizers for the enemy. And so, when the Nazis rolled into Germany, and everybody loves me with my Nazi references, but when the Nazis rolled into when the Nazis rolled into France from Germany, there was a French resistance, but there was many or more collaborators as there were anything else, who simply said, okay, this is the new political regime. What do I have to do to keep my mansion? What do I have to do to keep my, farm? What do I have to do to keep my kids safe and happy? And people went along to get along with the new regime. And here in America, there are probably a lot of people who, when push came to shove, would rather not change anything because they're comfortable enough as it is. And they're not really worried about the fine points of freedom or the fine points of a representative democracy.
We're definitely we the sheeple.
Yeah, that's a great term.
No doubt about that.
and that's, of course, the next question is, where do you draw the line? If 57% of the people are happy in a lackluster country with no freedom, is it a democratic ideal to try to overturn that, or is there some higher ideal besides the democratic ideal that one could say, well, I'm still going to try to turn this thing around, even if a majority of the people are happy with it and don't want to change it? But that's where we get back to our dictator or our strong arm who's going to tell us how to do things.
Right. Well, I just kind of relate it to the last 50 some odd years of my life living in supposed to be the greatest nation in the world, which I'm very happy to be part of that. And I think it's a very good republic, and overall we all have it pretty good. But I just look at over the years of how much of personal freedoms and liberties that I've been losing just incrementally, little bits at a time, to the point where now the differences from when I was young to now are huge. But yet, what do? I go to work every day and make a living for my family and, live the American dream. But sometimes you just got to sit back and say, it's not working anymore. And I think that's about where we're at.
Well, and then the question becomes, what do you replace it with?
I think we have a pretty good system. I think the system has just got so corrupted and so convoluted that I think the original concept would work and can work. I just don't think the powers to be allow it to work. They don't let it happen.
Yeah.
I'd kind of like to start over. Let's call all new elections tomorrow and let's reelect them all. I don't really think it would help anything.
Well, there's a certain argument that, a professional political class, for instance, has taken over. I think the biggest thing that's happened over the years, though, is government's become, and the New Deal would probably be one of the big turning points. I mean, historically, government was not about social welfare. Very little involvement in the welfare of the people directly in terms of, direct payments to people, policies and programs designed to feed, clothe, and house people. Those were not primary government functions in the 19th century. In the 20th century, they became primary government functions here in the United States. And now, and I love pointing this out, the middle class has all kinds of, quote, welfare benefits and breaks and things they get from the federal government, reimbursements and tax credits and all kinds of stuff. I just don't quite understand when a guy gets on the air and tells me if we just shoot all these welfare queens, we'd be better off. And then the next time he calls me, he starts telling me about these cool solar tax credits that he took so he could, build solar cells on his house, because that's different somehow.
And I'll tell you, just in my life, in the last 6 months, I actually purchased an appliance for my home that would give me that allowance.
Right.
And I'm not taking it.
Well, okay, now now we can have a whole conversation about this. That means either that you're a true believer, and you, as a matter of principle, you're not going to take it. But
it's my principle. Some won't let me.
Right, but some other people would say, you know what? A true capitalist never turns something like that down, because a true capitalist says if some idiot wants to give me more money than I think I'm entitled to, I should still take it because that's good business.
Oh man, now you got me in a.
I got you thinking, right? And not to use a prominent Democrat to defend my position, but Sam Donaldson years ago was catching a lot of heat for taking farming subsidies for his sheep farm. And he pointed out that I had no choice but to do it because in order to be competitive, everybody else takes the subsidies. So if I didn't, I'd go out of business.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad I'm not in that situation, because I'm not sure what I would do from a moral standpoint if I was in that situation.
Yeah, and then I was having this conversation actually last night with my brother. He says, "How come there's no cab service in Carlisle anymore? What happened to it?" And I say, "Well, the guy went out of business." And he's like, "Well, he had those big Crown Vic cars, and those big Crown Vics use up too much gas." He's like, "That's probably what happened, and he should have ran a better business model." I said, "Well, he wrote a letter to the paper basically saying he couldn't get his tariff raised." And I was explaining to my brother that the PUC controls what you can charge. So he didn't have the freedom to charge what he wanted to and let the market decide what works. He could only charge so much because the government says this is all you can charge if you run a cab. And that's your tariff.
Right.
And then my brother says to me, he goes, it makes no sense to me anyhow. He goes, because all these cabs you see in Harrisburg and everywhere else, they're all big and, not fuel efficient. And I said, well, now you're catching on. In a regulated monopoly, government comes in and says you can't have an unfair profit, right? And so how do you figure out what an unfair profit is? Well, you look at what the guy's expenses are, and you look at how much money he collects total, and you look at his profit margin, and if it looks too, quote, high, then it's gouging. But if it's small, then it's reasonable. So the only way in a regulated monopoly to up your net dollars that you take in is to increase your revenue. And in order to increase your revenue to keep your net at the same percentage points, you've got to increase your expenses. So it was basically saying, what you're realizing now is that it's not to the taxi driver's incentive to find a very fuel-efficient small car, because the government says they can only make, so much of a margin before it becomes unfair. So what they do is they inflate their expenses by using gas-guzzling, less than efficient cars, or at least that's a more beneficial thing in a regulated monopoly. Utilities have done this for years when they're only allowed to make a few percentage points on electricity monopolies. They run their expenses up so that they can charge more, because if you're only allowed to make 4% of $100 million, that's $4 million. But if you can make 4% of $200 million, that's $8 million. So you've got to figure out how to get to $200 million to make more money. And the only way to do it is to run your expenses up. Otherwise, if you just raise prices, your profit margin goes up, and that violates your tariff. So anyhow, I'm digressing, but I just want to say, there's another example of how government regulation saying to a farmer, or in this case, a business person, we're not going to tell you how to run your business, but we're going to tell you you can only charge this much, not what you have to collect, but the most profit you can make. And that warps business decisions as well. My brother's like, well, I just wouldn't participate. And I'm like, yeah, and you just wouldn't have a cab because it's illegal to provide cab service without the PUC stamp, and you can't have the PUC stamp without getting the tariffs approved. And I said they wouldn't raise this guy in Carlisle's tariffs, probably because the cab companies and the political clout, the people that are there, they don't want the new guys getting their tariffs raised, because that way they can get the long haul from Carlisle jobs, rather than rather than share it with somebody out here. But hey, just
Right.
politics ruining a man's life. That's all.
Yeah, it seems like at every turn of the road, there's a form of government somewhere throwing another roadblock in front of you. I mean, I've been self-employed all my life, Carl, so I think I'm allowed to speak a little bit like this.
Uh-huh.
You know, I've been making my own paycheck forever, and it's not easy. It's not easy.
Well,
Right about the time you get it all figured out, they throw you 3 more regulations you got to follow, or they throw this hurdle at you, or this. You know, it's like, okay, when's it time for me? You know,
right. And then there's all these consequences that come from regulation that aren't always linear. By the way, if anybody else wants to join in, I know I got one more caller here on hold, but it's 717-916-5189, 717-916-5189. I might have lost him. I might have lost him. I don't know.
that's okay.
But
I just was making a point about how everything the government gets involved with in my life just makes things more difficult and costs me more money and blah blah blah.
Well, let me tell you, like a hidden one that sounds like a great idea, and maybe it is a great idea, but here's the long-term cost of it. Okay, somebody I know says, "Oh, you know, truck driving regulations. We're talking about it. So you have a 14-hour in-service day. So the most you can work in a day is 14 hours. But the most you can drive is 11 hours, okay?
Right.
Then they came up with a new regulation and said, yeah, but you can only drive for 8 straight hours before you have to take at least a half-hour break. So that means, you know, after the 8 hours is up, you must stop for half an hour. And then, of course, you can get back on the road and drive the remaining 3 hours. So now you've used up 11 and a half hours out of your 14 hours in service. But after you hit 14 hours, and even if you're driving, you have to go out of service before you can recoup your drive time again with your mandatory stop. But when you do the math on this, it sounds great in theory because people go, oh, okay. You know, it's only taking half an hour out of his 14 hours in service. He still has the ability to drive 11 hours. So it shouldn't be that big of a deal. But the practical effect of it is on certain types of trucking, particularly, that all rolls over because that half-hour addition in the middle pushes everything else out to a point where it cycles where you might have to add an extra day for certain hauls because of the way all the time schedules work out. So the driver, even though he's maybe, say, 85% of the way there now, still has to take himself out of service and complete it during his next service period, and that in-service period pushes him into another day. So just adding this mandatory half-hour break is expected to cost the trucking industry several $1 billion in excess expenses in order to...
And who's the government to decide, you know, how a human body is going to react to sitting behind the wheel of a truck? I mean, when I was young, I drove a lot of truck. Mm-hmm. I come from the trucking industry when I was young. And, well, there's no way today I could go and do anything close to what those regulations tell me I'm supposed to do. Even back then, I mean, we had these regulations, and I couldn't follow them then.
Well, and
I mean, I know they're force-feeding it on you now, and it's getting harder and harder to get away with things. But who is the government to tell me that I can't get behind the wheel and go drive 4 hours and stop and take 15 minutes and go drive 4 more and stop and take 15 minutes and go and drive 4 more and stop for a half hour and go and drive 4 more?
Well, and here's the thing. There's a lot of people that those regulations appeal to because you always hear people complaining, oh, those truckers, they're up on the road and they scare me. And so there's a whole segment of our society that's in favor of the regulation. And I guess at one point you may be able to make an argument we should balance it out. But what sells really well is, we're going to just add a half-hour mandatory break. Now, what the truckers might tell you, though, sometimes is their real problem isn't that they wouldn't take themselves off the road if they could. It's that their dispatchers and the people who are responsible for them frown on them when they... In other words, if I'm driving and I'm just decide I'm kind of tired and I take myself off the road, I got a boss to answer to, right? Who says, What the hell are you doing? Why are you off the road? Why'd you take yourself out of service? You should be driving because you still can't. So I know for some of the truck drivers, they don't really like the regulations but they appreciate the fact that they can at least tell their dispatcher, "I'm sorry, I'm at 14 hours. I can't work anymore," or "I'm at 11 hours on the road, and I'm sorry, but I just can't drive any farther. It's just not happening." So I understand that there's maybe even some people in the trucking industry who are the drivers who like some of the regulation, but it's just all the unintended consequences. Like adding that half an hour was an interesting idea, and I could understand the logic behind it. But you're right. How does it infringe on the trucker's right? And is it really necessary? Or could the drivers self-regulate better if they weren't getting pushed by their companies to make unrealistic goals? I know, well, they say truck driving is the most regulated profession on earth.
I'm pretty sure it probably is when you come right down to it. But yet a doctor can go to an operating room and perform a 16-hour surgery.
Right.
And there's no regulations on that, but yet, you're right. And I think, quite honestly, and we'll never find out, but let's do an experiment. And tomorrow morning, let's say, hey, all you DOT regulations against the truck drivers, let's throw them out the window. Or let's do one better. Let's give them a 30-day suspension and say, there's no regulations for 30 days. We don't care. Go do what you feel like doing. I don't think us as Americans would really notice anything changing other than, hey, we might get our stuff quicker, or this might happen more efficiently, or, you know what I'm saying? It might actually work to the benefit.
That's an interesting question.
Not to the deficit.
Of course, those are the kinds of human experimentation that are hard to implement because nobody really wants to. Yeah, which reminds me, by the way, you brought...
Sounds good in theory, though.
You brought hospitals up. The doctors actually started... they were doing some studies, and they said, well, these interns are being made to work, or interns or... oh, gosh, I forget the two. The doctors are both interns and then they're residencies. That these, residents are working too many hours, and it's not good because they're working like all these straight hours, and they're going to make mistakes, and people are going to die, and this is bad. So they went up with a regulation where they said, okay, you can only stay on so long, and then you have to rotate out, and somebody else rotates in. And lo and behold, the error rate went up, and actually there were more medical malpractice issues and more bad care issues. And it turns out that a tired doctor is better than a second doctor, because the second doctor quite often didn't make the same observations the first doctor did, and handing off the exact information becomes problematic. So you're better off to have the same doctor see you 3 times, even though he or she might be a little tired at the end, than you are to have 2 doctors see you when they don't have the full benefit, the second doctor, of what the first doctor saw. And so there's more errors when you have split their time up like that, when you let them work and sleep more. Was counterintuitive, but the one nice thing about medicine is they're pretty ruthless about the numbers. And so they study this, and they watch their numbers change and said, oh, gosh, this works completely the opposite that we thought it would.
So I assume they took the regulation away?
Well, no, they haven't done that yet. They're working now on if they can solve the problem, because they believe being more rested is still good. They're working now to see if there's a way to make sure that the information transfers more perfectly from one doctor to the other as a secondary protocol. But you know what? Wouldn't surprise me if they found out they couldn't do that, or that won't work, that they would go back to longer time periods. But it's going to be tough to go back to longer time periods because that's where the human element comes in. People are going to be resistant to that, I have a feeling. Right.
So, hey, I did have a question that has completely nothing to do with your show or anything else.
Let me just throw the talk line number out before you shoot it. 717-916-5189, 717-916-5189. Call in if you want to talk. All right, what else do you want to say, my friend?
This is, over the years, I've just wondered about some things. You being a previous attorney, and you know the law very well. Why is it in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, us driving, having a driver's license is considered a privilege, when in my mind, I see it as a right that we have all paid for in taxes? It's, I don't understand. And the way I also understand it, there's states in the country that don't think about driving as a privilege like our Commonwealth does.
For the most part, including the U.S. Supreme Court, we've said driving is a privilege, not a right. And I'm not exactly sure why we feel that way. I know in the cities, right, you can make a pretty good argument the person need not drive to get from A to B. Out here in God's country, you drive 20 minutes to get to a grocery store sometimes. You drive at least 20 minutes to get to a mall. And as you head farther out into rural Pennsylvania, it's routine that people drive 30 minutes to get to work or 40 minutes to get to work one way because everything's so far apart. And so it's just never going to happen, because if they acknowledge driving as a right, then, heaven forbid, they would lose all their power over you, because that's how they hang all the nicky-knack regulations on the average person, by claiming, we don't have to let you do this, therefore. And you have to keep in mind, we have very few rights at the end of the day, because theoretically the government has tons of control that they just choose not to exercise. But for instance, if a doctor wants to give you some life-saving medicine, or at least believes it could be life-saving, and you're not part of a special portion of a clinical trial, you're not allowed to take it. I read a great article where a guy says, hey, it's interesting that you can't have 100% certainty of dying and have the doctor inject you with an experimental drug just to see if it works. But you are allowed to strap 2 pieces of wood to your feet and go down the mountain at 50 miles an hour if you so choose.
Yeah, I know. So, but in other words, is driving and driver's licenses that are considered a privilege, is that actually, like, legally, where does that stand?
No one's ever said that it's there. You have the right to travel, okay?
Right.
So you have the right to travel, and some people have said the right to travel means by any modern conveyance as well. And so far, the courts have not said that right to travel gives you a right to travel by automobile. That driving portion, the right for you to drive yourself, is a privilege and not a right. And see, it's the shorthand that courts have used to allow regulations that are probably would have to be more strictly controlled if it were a right. But by saying it's a privilege, we don't have to get there. And so this goes back to how the law really works. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, but you say it's a goose, then you get to treat it like a goose. It may be a duck because it walks and talks like a duck, but as long as you're allowed to call it a goose, then you get to treat it like a goose. And courts do that all the time, courts and legislatures. And then sometimes they won't do that. But if you're looking for logical answers, the law is not always filled with logical answers at the end of the day, unless you want to read back into the second level of it. So we as judges don't really want to say that driving is a right. So how do we do that? We'll just keep saying that it's a privilege.
So that's pretty much like a nationwide thing then?
Nobody, to my knowledge, no state has ever declared driving to be a right.
Okay. Maybe not declared, but other states could look at things a lot differently.
Well, and that's true because our Constitution allows all 50 states, when it comes to health, welfare, and safety, to set their own laws. And as long as those laws do not violate the United States Constitution, they can do it whichever way they want. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Well, reason being, a buddy of mine moved to Montana a couple years ago, and he keeps calling me all the time.
Now, Montana is the state where they really just don't like regulation to start with. And when the federal government said in order to get your highway funds, you have to have ticketing, they're the ones that started the roadside ticket where you pay $5 and go on your way so they could keep their highway funds.
Mm-hmm.
So the officer would pull you over and tell you were speeding, and then you would say,
Carl,
yeah.
I hate to cut you short, but a visitor just arrived. I'm going to have to go.
All right, my friend. Thank you.
I'll get back to you.
All right. We'll be here.
All right. See you, man.
All right, man. Dwayne, take care. 717-916-5189. Dwayne's off, so if you want to jump in here. I think it might have been Chris we lost a minute ago. I'm starting to recognize the numbers of some of these guys. What am I going to do? 717-916-5189 is the talk line number. Montana, this is sort of how it goes. We want our highway funds, so the federal government says we have to have a speeding ticket regime. All right, we have a roadside ticket. You pay the officer literally a small amount of cash right there roadside. and you get your ticket, and that's the end of it, because that way we qualify for our federal highway funds, but beyond that, we don't care. And that's a whole other question, by the way. You know, states being coerced by the federal government with money, and they let that happen. Well, they let it happen. Now, with the health care law, that was a question, and so the Supreme Court sort of struck a balance there and said, well, it's kind of coercion, so the states don't have to do this Medicare thing under the ACA, but they can if they want to. And everybody's kind of surprised because historically we've pretty much said the states can be held hostage by the federal government putting any caveats on federal funds that they want to, on the theory that the state would not, how would we say this? The state would not be required to participate in the program. They would just have to give up the money. And we all know how the states live off the federal government. In fact, if you want to talk about the growth of the federal government, one of the causes of the growth of the federal government and one of the enablers of it is the states, who continually take large sums of money from the federal government. And, of course, sometimes they have to because we have these federal mandates and the states, what they call the unfunded mandates. So the federal government tells the states they must do something. If they don't do it, then they aren't going to get certain funds. But at the same time, the state doesn't get any funds to do what they're told to do. And it's a vicious cycle. So there's a lot. And then states, of course, they don't want to look like, politicians in Harrisburg or Albany or, wherever, Austin, they go, oh, no, our state budget's very small. Now, we did pass 10 laws that require the counties to each spend $1 million apiece next year, but we have not increased the state budget one bit. And these unfunded mandates get pushed down to the state and local level and then get pushed on to the taxpayer and the consumer. That way, well, everybody pushes the buck, but the small political entities don't have the power to fight back, and it's not effectively known. So, big problem, unfunded mandates. I know the Republicans here in Pennsylvania have been very good about trying to avoid passing any new ones, but even then they'll do it. They just are less vocal about it. 717-916-5189. I want to hear what you guys have to say. We got that interesting picture comparing Obama to Hitler. Our last caller just said Vladimir Putin might be an ideal president. I'll paraphrase him just a little bit there. You may have an opinion on that, and I'd be curious to hear what it is. So get ready with the talk line. I wanted to hit up you. I want to hit you guys up on our archives, because I don't think everybody realizes we have a pretty spiffy archive here. So when you go to the Spreaker site and you look through it, I've got all the old shows up there from back when I did Weekend Appointment and before. And so we've got a huge legal library. Obviously, I'm not a practicing attorney now, but they were all recorded when I was a practicing attorney. So, let's take that for what it's worth. It doesn't mean I knew what the hell I was doing. And so I'm going to just play for you a excerpt or a piece about a few minutes long that involves, and of course, this would be how I get my sneaky break in here. It was a piece that we did back in the day on child custody and the 16 factors. I'm not sure how it's going to sound, but I think I got it integrated in here okay. And I'll let you guys listen to that. And also, I want you to get your questions ready, okay? 717-916-5189, 717-916-5189. I'm going to take your questions here on the air and your calls, but right now I'm just going to play this pre-recorded piece on custody real quick because I want you to hear, this is a sample of what we have in the archives. I want to make sure people are aware of what's in there because there's literally thousands of hours of stuff that you could listen to, but a lot of it's pretty educational. So we'll give it a try here.
Pennsylvania has put in place a statute which controls what factors a court could consider when awarding custody or must consider.
This is a
and that's found at
piece
23 PACS 5328.
So I'll be back in a few.
Domestic Relations Code. Now, while these factors are
717-916-5189.
Pennsylvania and statutory, the general precepts would apply to custody cases in most states. The court says, in ordering any form of custody, the court shall consider the best interest of the child by considering all relevant factors, giving weighted consideration to those factors which affect the safety of the child, including the following. Which party is more likely to encourage and permit frequent and continuing contact between a child and another party? This one's probably the most interesting because it basically means if you're the person who's going to share the child more, then you're probably the person we should put the child with. I often encourage clients to consider not withholding custody unnecessarily simply because this factor will be used against them at trial. A judge may say, you have not been giving or permitting frequent and continuing contact with the other party. I don't trust you to facilitate the non-custodial parent's relationship, so I'm going to award custody to the other person. And that factor alone could carry the day if everything else were equal. The second factor is the present and past abuse committed by a party or member of the party's household, whether there's a continued risk of harm to the child or an abused party, and which party can better provide adequate physical safeguards and supervision of the child. So if you or the people in your household have a history of abuse, and if there's a continued risk of harm to the child, or who can provide better adequate physical safeguards and supervision, those things will all come into play. Pretty much common sense here. If you live with a child abuser, you're going to have difficulty with custody. If you have a history of abuse, this is one of the reasons why people shouldn't simply just go in and be found to have committed acts of domestic violence on a PFA, for instance, and may want to fight those, because sometimes people will simply admit the allegation to avoid a hearing, but it'll later be used against them in a child custody proceeding. The third factor is the parental duties performed by each party on behalf of the child. That means, before people split up or even during a prolonged split up, who's doing what with the child? Are you the person who's providing the primary care? Are you going to games? Are you doing all the things that a parent does for a child in an intact relationship? And what was the division of labor? As we know, between some couples, even in intact families, only the mother or the father is basically providing time and attention to the children, whereas in some split homes, the duties are still split fairly equally. So this will vary on a case-by-case basis. But again, active participation, knowing your child's teachers and things like that, and spending time with the child and taking care of the child are the things that the court is supposed to look at. Number 4 is the need for stability and continuity in the child's education, family life, and community life. Words stability and continuity. Stability says which parent's going to provide better stability, and that can be important. The second word is a little different. Continuity means who's going to keep things the same or help keep things the same. So again, keeping the marital home might give you a strategic advantage in terms of family life and community life, whereas if you move a long distance away, that may make a break in continuity of the child's education, family life, etc. But then again, you may be the more stable parent. But generally in this context, it sort of is directing you towards thinking about not changing the child's life dramatically. So if you're going to make a move out of the marital residence or otherwise want to change the custody situation, it's best to stay in the same school district and around the same family members. On the other hand, perhaps a move out of state to a better school district to the location of the children's grandparents would also have arguable merit. Number 5, the availability of extended family, which is what I was just talking about. So again, moving to or providing extended family is considered a benefit. Number 6, the child-siblings relationships. Here we don't want to break kids up if they have strong sibling pairings. We don't want to take a child even away from a step brother or sister if there's a strong bond there, and that's a factor the courts have to consider. Number 7, this one's a biggie, the well-reasoned preference of the child based on the child's maturity and judgment. We're not going to let a 4-year-old pick where they live generally. But if a 16-year-old says, I find it easier to study at my mom's house and here's why, that's going to carry a lot of weight. There's no magic age in Pennsylvania, by the way, so it's just the child's maturity and judgment as weighed by the judge, and then the preference of the child. Quite often children have no preference, but they will tell both parents they have a preference simply because they're afraid to upset either of them. So keep that in mind. The best way to find the child's preference is through a counselor in our experience. Number 8, the attempts of a parent to turn the child against the other parent, except in cases of domestic violence where reasonable safety measures are necessary to protect the child from harm. This is the old parent alienation syndrome, where somebody works hard to make the child believe the other parent is bad or wrong. There seems to be an exception here for domestic violence. So what you say and how you conduct yourself vis-a-vis the other parent can be used against you. So speaking ill of the other parent is not a good idea, nor is it good for the child. Number 9, which party is more likely to maintain a loving, stable, consistent, nurturing relationship with a child adequate for the child's emotional needs? Quite frequently when we've had professional evaluations done by a custody evaluator, it'll turn out that one of the parents connects with the child on a much better nurturing or emotional level. Quite frequently, that's the parent you would think it is, the one who seems more nurturing and emotional, but not always. So somebody's gruff demeanor doesn't necessarily mean they can't fit the bill here. Number 10, which party is more likely to attend the daily physical, emotional, developmental, educational, and special needs of the child? So if you're an over-the-road truck driver and you're out of town 65 hours out of the week, including weekends, there's probably a good argument that the other parent will fit the bill better here. On the other hand, if you work from home and your spouse doesn't, you may make an argument that you'll better be able to do these things. But this also has to do with the overall parenting skills as we would traditionally see them. And so this is kind of a big area of controversy in any custody case. Number 11, the proximity of the residence of the parties. And the judge is splitting up custody. The proximity of the residence is important. If one person lives in Utah and one person lives in Pennsylvania, the split can't be 50-50. On the other hand, if you live 1 mile away, all other things being equal, probably the split should be 50-50. So keep that in mind if you're planning to relocate out of the marital residence or move. The closer you stay, the better your chances of keeping custody. On the other hand, if you have a solid leg up on the other party, moving away could make a strategic advantage because the child would need to go with you and the physical proximity would not be helpful to the other side. But I'd be very careful about strategizing such a move, as courts tend to hold moves against parties if they believe they're being done merely to frustrate custody. Number 12, each party's availability to care for the child, ability to make appropriate child care arrangements. That goes back to who's at home, who can be at home when, and who can afford daycare and or has family members which would help with daycare. And while this is a little more mechanical than the prior ones, it basically does come down to who has access to the babysitters and who's going to do the best job taking care of the child care on a day-to-day basis.
You didn't think I was going to let you listen to that whole thing, because if you want to hear the rest, you're going to have to go to the archives. So we go to Spreaker.com and just go to CarlRominger.com and follow it back through, and you'll be able to hear the entire piece going through the 16 child custody factors. And, of course, we've got all those archives of all those old legal questions and shows. So lots of things to be answered there, and I highly recommend if you get a chance, you can listen to some of it. Of course, all this is archived as well. Interesting thing about Spreaker is as soon as we're done, it turns into a live message. And I was just going to say, I don't know, Don, if you're available to get on or not, but if you want to make fun of the other callers, you could always do it on the air. Making me laugh. Don suspects that Dwayne had to run because his weed dealer was at the door. Well, he said he was self-employed. I mean, doesn't mean he's a drug dealer, does it? And he knew something about truck driving. I mean, I'm not sure that those things all go together. But I always like the suspicion that you get from funny men. We've been talking about, if you're just joining us, a little bit about, and I was talking earlier about Bo Bergdahl and how unfairly I think he's being treated, as I did on Wednesday. And again, if you want to jump on the conversation, 717-916-5189. And I want to hear what you guys have to say. You know, if you think I'm crazy, and he's just a complete traitor, tell me. I'm curious again to get beaten up on that point. But I'm finding out when I was reading the newspapers that it sounds like, and I'm sure this is just all government conspiracy to make these things up now, but it's sounding like he didn't have very good treatment at the hands of the Taliban, which would not coincide with the theory that he was there happily as their guest the entire time. Now, there were pictures apparently of him playing soccer and doing some other things. I got to imagine in year 4 of your captivity, you might get a little wishy-washy in the brain after being kept in a tiger cage in the dark for months at a time. I think that may have some explanation on what's going on. So until the true facts come out, I'm a little more willing to give him the benefit of the doubt than I think some of you are. But that's just me by nature, I guess. I'm so magnanimous and so light years ahead. No, not really. Actually, it's just that I think I'm better at breaking down one little thing, which is I don't know that he was a traitor. I don't know that he caused the death of any of his other soldiers because he walked off to, quote, help the Taliban. If he did, and I've said this before, if that's true, he should be punished. But in order to figure out if that's true or not, we needed him back. And we need to have a whole conversation about these things to figure out where we really sit on this issue. So that would be my position on the matter. I mean, really, generally would be. So I think Don Stevens is calling. I thought I heard him in the background there, but I don't see anything up yet. 717-916-5189 if you want to get on the air and chit-chat a little bit. I'm always looking for callers, of course. And I know it's a tough gig right now because it's kind of nice out this time of year. And on a Sunday evening, you all want to cruise around in your cars and whatnot. But it's a little rainy out there, at least in the Carlisle area today. Not exactly ideal weather for sitting out on the porch, but if you like to watch the rainfall, maybe not so bad. And one of the other things I did want to do was to get... okay, here we have a caller. Hey, you're on the air, my friend.
What's going on, Carl?
Hey, we're just talking about President Obama and Hitler, one and the same, apparently, according to the internet.
Well, I cut that part. I just fell asleep during the little blurb with the legal stuff. I went and took a leak. You probably did the same thing. How about getting some CD? Play some music or something.
Well, okay, now you brought up the sore point of music. So if we play some music, right, I've got to pay ASCAP and or BMI each a couple $1,000s, all right? And then...
You can compose your own.
No, wait, listen. You're right. I have to compose it. I have to own all of it. But here's the other squirrely thing. Like Spreaker and a lot of these other internet websites, they get all nervous when they hear the music because they want to know what you have for rights management on it. So then, of course, you have to prove to them that you made it yourself, which becomes an endeavor all by itself since, there's so many billions of pieces of music out there. But it's interesting. So we're getting there. I'm looking for a garage band or somebody who's musically talented who wants to, just make up some free music for the show.
I got a name for you. I know what you could call your band.
Oh, no.
Bob Bergdahl's Beard.
Yeah. Now,
That's been some of my favorite memes of the week. The ones where they compare Bob Bergdahl, the Muslim,
yes,
to Duck Commander or whatever his name is, that Duck Dynasty dude.
What was it?
You seen this?
What was it somebody was saying about the other day was, the only difference between a Duck Commander and Islamic guy that Americans hate is whether they have a turban on at the moment.
Well, the dude even wears those bandanas or whatever they are. That's kind of like a redneck turban.
So the thing that I had posted from Putin, right, where Putin makes this statement that's causing American conservatives to say they wish he was the president, has him to do with Sharia law, where he basically says, we don't care about the Muslim Sharia law, and if they want to live somewhere where there's Sharia law, then they should go live somewhere else, kind of deal. This Sharia law has really got everybody up in arms, but it doesn't really seem to be a problem here in America. But everybody's worried that magically, we're going to adopt Sharia law. But I guess if you're a democracy and you wanted to adopt it, you could. It's a little oppressive to women, I think, might be one of the problems.
Yeah, talk about regulations. Sheesh. But those aren't the... I was interested in the topic you were talking about, regulations, because I think that is something that it's about mutually beneficial behavior.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have government, is to manage, civilization.
Yeah, and that's probably not an unfair. The lawyer bent would be, reason we have laws is because a society doesn't run without laws, but more fine point might be what are laws? They're the rules or the understandings that allow transactions between individuals to happen in a way that has a sufficient framework that you can have a society, and what the rights and obligations of the various members and collectives of society are vis-a-vis each other, and what their redress is in the really old days, right? If you killed my son, I guess I could just pick up a hatchet and kill you. Did you ever watch the show Deadwood?
No, never have.
Okay, well, it's an old West town, right? And it's a little lawless. And there's a great scene where one guy shoots another guy, and the whole lynch mob starts to form up. And they're going to hang him for killing him. And the guy shouts out, "He killed my brother in Kansas City." And then everybody's kind of like, "Oh, okay." And then they all go about their business. And that idea of, you can't kill somebody unless it's justified. Well, in a frontier town like that was sufficient justification for a person simply to say he killed my brother. Therefore, it was okay for you to kill him. That's a very unevolved, but still a basic notion of law, right? That a person cannot hurt somebody else unless they've somehow hurt them first. And now in the modern era, we have what we call a lawsuit that replaces all of that, right? He hurt me, therefore I want money, or I want some form of other relief. And those are rules. And so regulations, like you say, are other refined rules. And of course, there has to be a balance, because you could lower the speed limit to 5 miles an hour. We'd have a lot less traffic accidents. We'd all probably die in our cars of old age. So there's a balance somewhere to be struck. So yeah, I'm not saying regulation's bad per se. People say, what gives somebody the right to tell me? And that's an interesting question. What does give somebody the right to tell me? I didn't ask to be a member of society, did I? I mean, I thought I just was born into it. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's true. I just get nervous talking to libertarians in that area because, they want small, little tiny governments. And I think a certain level of government is necessary, especially as our society and our economy becomes more sophisticated. Advanced technology and communications and things like that, we need more advanced government.
Well, and that's
I know you're not a big fan of global warming and all that stuff, but
no, I can play my global warming piece for you too. When you're ready to go to the bathroom again, I can put the global warming stuff back up.
That's good. See, here's my feeling on that: is that are you familiar with Pascal's wager?
Yes, I am.
This is the Christian. Maybe you can probably explain it better than me, but I think that argument applies to us in our environment.
Okay, so
we've never had millions of cars releasing,
So Don is saying, let me just tell everybody what you're saying, because I'll put it out. Don is saying that we should apply to the environment Pascal's wager. And Pascal, aside from being a mathematician, was a very religious person, and he suggested that people needed to believe in God and live a good life and do all the things that a Christian is supposed to do, because there was no other logical assumption. Because if there was a God, and you obeyed that God and did all those things, you'd go to heaven. But on the off chance that there wasn't a God, you'd still be in the exact same position you were in before, which is you would cease to exist. So if there is a God, you're going to heaven, and if there's no God, you're back to right where you're going to be. And therefore, a logical person, a mathematician, for instance, would take that position. And you're saying is we should just assume that global warming could happen or could be a problem, or that we might be driving it. So whether we know for sure we are or we aren't, the safer choice is just to try not to be the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a pretty fair question. It runs into two problems, and I mean not real problems, but I mean issues. One is Pythagorean's theorem. Yeah, Pascal's challenge works really well when there's only two possible answers, right? Leading a good life, you go to heaven, otherwise you cease to exist, or you go to hell, or whatever. That's assuming that his version of religion is right, If
well, that's always the response the atheists give.
Right.
You better be certain that the God you're gambling on is the right God.
Right. Otherwise, you might. Right. That's one possibility, and the other one is in the global warming arena. It would be unfortunate to discover later that we didn't need to do what we did if there's great economic cost to it in its inception and creation and moving forward, so that there's still a cost to be figured out. So, depending how wealthy we feel and whether or not we're going to delay the economic advancement of certain peoples, those are choices we might have to weigh out. So that would be the other potential downside to it, which is, My concern is, and maybe this is a better example. Even if you apply Pascal's wager, should global warming issues really just be a wealth redistribution scheme? And that's maybe where the real problem in this case is. Even if it's true or not true, the political solutions being offered magically look like the Western world paying a lot of money to the third world, so that, to quote, make up for the expropriation of the world's atmosphere. I mean, we haven't paid reparations for slavery here in America, and we haven't paid reparations to the American Indian or Native American, or what do they call them down there in Washington, Redskins.
Yeah, right.
We haven't done those things. So why start now? You know.
Well, I kind of look at it this way. Oil money doesn't just make people here in this country rich. It also makes people, for example, the Saudi family.
Right.
The family's so powerful that the country is called their family. And that's oil money. And our friend Bin Laden, that we like to talk about on the internet, all that money came from oil that financed all that terrorism.
Oh, and we talk about the Saudi money. I mean, it's just stupendous amounts of money, unbelievable.
Unfathomable to American people. Wealth is unimaginable to what wealth that they have.
Yeah. In fact, it was being explained to me yesterday by some guys who was at the Harrisburg Beer and Cigar Club for their little picnic, and a couple of these guys were over there working out their horse race, like what they're going to bet on, I guess, So one of the other guys, I was funny because one of the other guys says, for as much mental energy as you guys have expended over there, you better actually win, because, it's like 5 guys talking for 2 hours to figure out what horse is going to place where. But one of the guys was saying, and I just thought it was interesting, is, each of those tracks is a little bit different length, and that's a problem. But that one of the reasons why this is what they were saying. Okay, I don't know if it's true. It could just be gossip. They said one of the reasons that there hasn't been a Triple Crown winner, in a long time, is that the Saudis buy up the best horses to take over. And they disappear from this market. So when you have a really good horse that's young and early, you want to get it to the Saudis because they'll pay unbelievable amounts of money for these horses. And therefore, the talent pool in the horses is a little bit skewed here in the United States because the Saudis and a couple other countries, the kings and the royalty there, will buy up these horses at exorbitant fees. So it's pulling the best talent out of the horses that we have, which is why you don't have horses that have the physicality to win all 3 races. It's interesting. Could be true.
Oh, I'm not surprised.
If it's not true, it's at least a parable in a way, because I think the one Saudi king has a flying stable that can carry like 14 horses in a jumbo jet. So anywhere he goes.
Yeah, but hey, go gas up the monster truck, Carl. When you go out drive a Crown Vic, that thing gets for about 4 miles a gallon. You might as well just mail your paycheck right over to Saudi Arabia.
Well, right, absolutely, and that's.
Well, you do give a little bit of it to other places. But
Venezuela.
Yeah.
And
At least those guys. At least when Chavez was alive, he did good things with the money.
Well,
he shared it with the people.
Yeah, Chavez. That guy could talk longer than I could. I mean, it's 3 hours radio show here. Chavez would
just. Not as handsome as you, Carl.
Chavez would just shrug, and he'd fill 3 hours. I mean, come on.
Yeah, but they have cheap gas. They got cheap food. Everybody gets free health care. Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah, right.
Well, he made it work. He used his oil money to benefit his people, is what I'm saying. He didn't put it in his pocket and have a flying stable with 14 horses in it,
And actually, okay, Chavez is what we call a true believer, I think. So he's one of the few guys who, I don't know if his family got wealthy. I'm sure he fleeced his country a little bit because none of these dictators or, quasi-dictators can get, without getting a little tempted, I'm sure. But unlike, Mubarak and some of these other guys where you discover that they're worth, $2 billion when they're deposed, I think Chavez, I would agree. I think he was all about robbing from the oil companies and trying to spread it. Now, there's a whole question about their oil industry and what state he left it in terms of, lack of capital investment in it and scaring off foreign investors and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, you're right. I mean, he truly believed in what he was doing. But the one problem with true believers is they only last once, you know? And then what you get is the second stringers, and the true believers don't. Somebody tell me you don't elect a true believer as a politician because, you know, that nobody really wants the true believer at the end of the day because they're never gonna you can't corrupt them, you can't deviate them, so they're never gonna get the support. So whoever replaced him and his handpicked guy over there is not doing so well, as I understand it. So I don't know. I'm mumbling now, but you understand my point.
Well, it's an experiment, and it's in our hemisphere, and you know it's relevant because they sell us oil.
Right. Well, you know, and energy wealth has saved everybody's ass, so to speak, collectively. You've got Putin. I mean, Russia would not be anything like it is right now if it hadn't had this huge resurgence in energy sales, and they control the natural gas supply for lots of Europe right now through the Ukraine. And so, in order,
the currency of our entire global civilization is right now.
Yeah, and so if you want to, if you're Russia, by the way, you know the Russians have a giant nuclear-powered icebreaker, and if you Google it on the web or look it up, you've ever seen any specials on it. This icebreaker is the only nuclear-powered icebreaker in the world. It's huge, and it can cut through 30 feet of ice. Okay, think about that: 30 feet of ice. It can just sail right through it. And it is capable of going all over and unlike the Antarctic, which is kind of funny, going back to global warming for a second, but somebody said, oh, you know, the Arctic's melting, it's going to raise the sea level. And that's not technically true because the Arctic basically floats on the water already. The Antarctic, different story. But as a result, with a giant icebreaker like this, they now can sail anywhere they want around the North Pole and the Arctic Ocean for the most part because there's very little areas they can't sail with it. And the question is, why do the Russians want or put so much money into this giant icebreaker? And a buddy of mine who's a pretty smart guy tells me that the real play on this was to prevent Canada from, or the U.S. from, piping gas across the Arctic to Europe to sidestep the Russians. In other words, they want to control the Arctic Sea, essentially, so that strategically it would be difficult for us to move through there. And if we wanted to lay pipelines, you know, they would have easy access to them strategically because they don't really want Europe being able to get their gas from anyone but them because they're making so much money on it. I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not, but it sounds like a long-term...
It makes sense. I mean, you know, it is the most important thing, you know, to the world economy.
Yeah, and from a Russian standpoint...
Without fossil fuels, we got nothing really right at this point.
And from
drive industry,
right, and from the Russian standpoint, they got nothing else to offer the world besides fossil fuels for them, and the ability to go to space, of course, because they do that better than us still. But
and cheaper.
Yeah, and cheaper. That's right. Well, that was the joke, though. Was the Russian system was a little more what do I want to say, rough and ready. Actually, it's a good question that was answered on my. I put an article up on one of the things I posted on CarlRominger.com from the Straight Dope. And this guy, Cecil, writes these things. And one of the questions was why do the Americans land over water and the Russians land on land when they come back from space? And he said, well, realistically, it's because certain areas of Russia, you know, they have vast quantities of land where it makes it practical to try to hit, you know, because obviously you can be off by a little bit. So you need a big area where you can land. And it's just vast, flat land. So it's not a bad area to land a spacecraft up in certain areas of, I guess, the Siberian tundra or whatever you want to call it. So, but he said also because the U.S. just likes big shows of power. I mean, what's better than 30 boats cruising through the ocean to, you know, get the capsule? So that's why we land our capsules on the water because, you know, here in America we have giant, vast areas out west which are all owned by the federal government, as we've learned recently due to the Nevada land grab out there, whatever you want to call it, with Clive and Bundy.
Well, if you're Clive and Bundy, you can just roam your cattle on there for free because, you know.
Right, because you can, because it's not really federal land. But
where did I see there was a meme about he owes more to the federal government than all other ranchers in the country combined.
And he won round 1 or 2 here, right? Now, he lost all his legal battles, but for some reason he's still got cows out there.
Man. Well, that's our system.
Yeah. And I don't know. I don't know. As kids, obviously, they're probably waiting for the old man. The government can outwait the old man. The economics of cattle ranching, I just don't know. I don't know enough about it to know, And what about the guys who buy the cattle from him? I mean, aren't they guilty
well,
of?
That's to blame, really. Let's be honest.
Aren't they somehow complicit in it? If in fact he's defrauding the government and they know?
It's probably McDonald's.
Right. Well, I thought he said McDonald's bought the dairy cows. That's what I was under the impression.
And then the horses and the other meats that they mix in there with it.
Well, that's over in Europe.
I don't know that. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, you don't get sued. Over in Europe, they actually had that scandal recently. They eat horse meat in Europe, so it's important, okay? So there's a lot of Europeans that will eat horse meat. There are many other Europeans who, much like their American counterparts, are horrified by the concept of eating horse meat. But here in America, it's real simple because the slaughterhouse that does cows and pigs, they maybe mix up some pork and some beef once in a while, but they never accidentally mix a horse in because they don't slaughter horses. Well, over in Europe, they were discovering that some unscrupulous people were just sliding some horse meat in with the ground beef, to extend it because it was a little cheaper. But because the facility processes horses and cows, it's not hard to do because it's not like anybody's like, wait, there's a load of horses here. That's normal. But apparently, a lot of Europeans were eating beef, thinking they were eating beef, were actually eating horse. I would eat horse meat. I don't have a problem with that. I mean.
If it tastes good, I'll eat it.
Somebody wants to cook it up for me, and that's an invitation. I'm sure somebody out there listening.
I love Anthony Bourdain. I always, if I were going to be anybody, it would be him. I love that. That's the job I want.
Yeah, just eating any random weird thing you can find.
Travel around the world and meet cool people and eat cool stuff.
So
although the one time, it was the Bushmen in South Africa where they made him eat the boar's sphincter.
Yeah.
And in their culture, they were like, "Oh, you're going to love it." It was like an honor to eat the sphincter.
And here in America, that's just a hot dog. That's just another hot dog, man. That's the big deal. So what? You ate a sphincter. And did you get the lips too? Of course. Okay. Well, that's a hot dog.
Anyways.
All right, my friend. Well, I appreciate you calling in, and if you want to jump back in the show later, feel free.
Okay, I'm sure I can think of something.
Yeah, go. Yeah, and then if you can round up some other squirrels, feel free. All right, my friend.
Later.
All right, 717-916-5189. Carl Rominger here. Whatever you guys want to talk about, it's kind of a free for all. But we're also talking about Obama. Is he really Hitler? Is he Hitler reincarnated? Oh, how ironic would that be? My name's Adolf Hitler. I'm all for racial purity. Oh, I've been reincarnated as a black man. Not really sure they're one and the same, but of course, like I say, on the internet, people seem to think they are. So if you want to call in and talk about that, 717-916-5189. And of course, Don brought up global warming, so I'm going to have to play my global warming challenge again here at some point for you to remind you that global warming is not the emergency that the Gore people would have you believe. In fact, I believe Al Gore said that the Arctic would be melted by 2014. I'm looking around and the water level has not risen. I keep hoping that the beach would eventually reach Harrisburg so that I wouldn't have to drive so far. But again, that has not happened because apparently water levels are not rising. Somebody wants to know if I can see how many people are listening right now. With Spreaker, you only can get a raw count, so not really sure how many people are literally on right now. And it doesn't include any like split signals. So if one connection is being used simultaneously or be through a third-party service, et cetera, et cetera. So the long answer is we have some raw numbers, and then we can look later at how many downloads there are from various sources. Looks like we're getting around, based on our numbers, about 250 to 300 total listens to a show right now. That includes all the live listeners as well as what people who listen during the next 4 to 5 days. And that's based on certain ways that we can look at the numbers. But that's still good. I mean, a few hundred people want to tune in and listen to me talk. I'm always flattered, and I really appreciate it. But I'd like to get it bigger, so that's why I'm asking everybody to share this show. If you can on Facebook, go ahead and put it out there, and we'll keep trying to move it. What I really need to get is a good call volume, because that's what this show is supposed to be about. We're supposed to be taking your calls, talking and chit-chatting with you, and getting you here live on the air. So, and I see Sean is actually listening because he just replied to what I said. So, yeah, no, Sean, it's probably pretty good. I mean, the short answer is I kind of am blessed in the sense that I already had an audience left over from WHP 580 and then WIOO. So it's not like I'm completely unknown to the radio, which I think if somebody was brand new at this, it would take a little longer to try to find some people who might listen. So I'm fortunate enough to have some people that will listen because they've heard of me or listened to me before. I'm glad, and we have a big archive of shows, which I think makes a big difference as well. Gives people stuff to listen to, etc. But what I really, really want is to get the call volume up on this show. Of course, it's oh boy, what's that number? 717-916-5189. I didn't even have to look. I remembered it finally. 717-916-5189. Oops. Oh, no. 717-916-5189. And, of course, if you go back to our original post, 5189 is a lucky number in Chinese, and that's, of course, why we picked it. So it stands for I want prosperity or something, or I want more prosperity. Can't remember exactly, but it is posted up there somewhere. Long story short, anyhow, so you build up these audiences, but the idea is, I want you to think about this for a minute. During a typical, say, Ken Matthews show on WHP 580 in the afternoon, there might be 30,000 people listening. So out of those 30,000 people want to call in, and they get motivated to call in or hot about a topic. They'll pick up the phone and they'll dial it up, right? Well, they don't have 30,000 callers in 3 hours. You may have 30 callers an hour. So that would be like 1 in 10,000 people, right? Something 1 in 1,000 people. So, in order to really get reasonable call volume, also, you can't all sit around and just listen to me for 3 hours every night. What do I mean by that? Well, most times people are going to be like, I'll listen for 20 minutes, I'll listen for a half hour, I'll listen for this long. So really you have to build up a listener part of a few thousand listeners so that any given moment you might say have like 500 live listeners. And that way, when people feel tempted to call, and they do call, you'll get that volume. You always have your super callers. If you guys want to be part of the whack pack, I guess you're going to call you that. Howard Stern always has his super callers, but those are the people that are part of the whack pack that sort of become part of the show and that sort of thing. But even when Durgan was doing it, and I was subbing for Durgan, we had certain callers, Mike in Lebanon, if you guys remember him. We had somebody should tell Mike in Lebanon about this show. I bet he would call. Hey, my friend. And Tall Bill and all kinds of guys and gals, and who I really like talking to on a regular basis because you get to know their personalities and what they're interested in and that sort of thing, and that was always fun. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, learning about this show is the hard part, and that's why I'm just encouraging people to spread the word. Would call, but just dropped wife off at ER. Is that a valid excuse? Well, let me tell you something, James. That's like halfway there, okay? That's halfway there. But if you're stuck in the ER, in the emergency room at some point with nothing to do, we'll still be on for an hour and a half. And let me tell you something. Unless your wife's really, really on her way out, and I don't mean that in a bad way, you know how the ER is these days. They're kind of like, well, we'll triage you and the doctor will be in to see you shortly. I actually went and I cut my finger on a catfish. Imagine that. My middle finger. So I'd like to show it to people, to show them the scar. And I cut it on this catfish. And I went to the Holy Spirit, I think. And I'm sitting at the Holy Spirit Hospital. And I don't think I'm making this up. I needed stitches, right? Well, I think they had to recut the wound or separate it. They had growed together in the many hours I sat waiting to get my stitches. And at Insult to Injury, You Got Mail was playing. The movie, you remember Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, You Got Mail. And I watched it twice on TBS before they got to me. So it was cruel and unusual punishment in the emergency room waiting to get my catfish wound fixed. I would have loved to have been out fishing. And I still have the scar. I can look down and see it right now. So I just mentioned that to say that if you are in the emergency room, you may find that you have a lot more time than you realize. Oh, let's talk about that, actually. Emergency rooms are getting busier. Why are they getting busier? Well, Obama told us that the America ACA would solve the problem, right? Because the poor people would stop using the emergency room as their primary care physician. Well, now that they're sure that they're covered, they're going even more. So the first statistic is emergency rooms visits are up. Emergency visits are the most expensive portion of healthcare services as compared to primary physician services. As a result, expect to see insurance costs go up. And of course, we're now learning 2 million potential problems in that registry of so many people. Plus, we don't know how many people have paid. Plus, I don't think a lot of people realize how bad their deductibles really are yet because they haven't been asked to pay them enough yet. I can go on and on about the ACA, but it's my firm belief that it will be in shambles, and that public portion of it being in shambles will happen shortly. Perhaps it's maybe already happened, and maybe Obama cleverly covered up the VA and keeps us from talking about the ACA by making sure that all I care about is Bo Bergdahl's mistreatment at the hands of the American people. Or, as you would say, the release of a traitor in exchange for some dangerous terrorists. I guess everybody's got their own opinion, right, on that one. But I'm not saying he was a dangerous traitor. I'm not saying he wasn't. I'm just saying I want to know more. But I believe that bringing all our soldiers home should be our first priority. And the fact that he was the only POW, or whatever you want to call him, we'll just say prisoner of war because he was fighting for us when he fell into the enemy's hands. If he was Benedict Arnold, he really wasn't getting a really good end of that deal. Being allowed to play soccer after spending a few years of poor treatment, maybe going out and shooting a rifle, that's kind of the Squeaky Fromm thing, right? Not Squeaky Fromm, who am I thinking of? Patty Hearst. Like Patty Hearst robbing the bank with the boys. It could be Stockholm Syndrome. I know. Oh, psychological defense. You know what? I would like 5 volunteers that I could keep in tiger cages for 5 years, and we'll see what kind of tricks I could teach you. I bet the average person, if kept in a cage for 5 years, even Jean-Luc Picard, at the very end when he's released from the Kardashians, says, "You don't understand. I saw 5 lights." But there were only 4 lights, and he kept saying there were only 4 lights. But he said, "I saw 5 lights," meaning the torture had worked on him. And it was just his sheer strength. And that was Jean-Luc Picard, and that was the Kardashians? Kim Kardashians. I'm amusing myself tonight. Anyhow, 717-916. I'm going to get this number right. 717-916-5189. 5189. So if you want to get on the air here, I'd be happy to have you. And in the meantime, I think I'm feeling like I should remind you about the global warming stuff. So here comes a little history, my little challenge on global warming, which I've played before on the air, but I think it's important to remind you. So those of you who believe that global warming is the end of the world, like REM says, it's the end of the world. I'm going to have to pay rights on it, so I'm sorry I can't sing for you. Sorry, guys. All right, here's a little brief ditty. Anybody that needs to take a break, this is your chance. Don't shut off the signal. It's not really an advert either. It's not an advert. Talking about adverts going around reminds me of Max Headroom. All right, a little bit on global warming. I have a little question I'd like to get an answer to when it comes to climate change or global warming, depending on what you want to call it. The United Nations has said that anthropogenic or man-made causes are the dominant cause of global warming. Dominant cause is a legal term borrowed from insurance law. So what you need to understand about the dominant cause is it means when there's more than one cause, it's which cause is the most responsible amongst the many. So if you have 2 causes, two actual causes, you would then determine which one was the greater of the 2, and the dominant cause would have to be 51% greater. If you have 3 causes, then the dominant cause would have to be larger than the other 2 causes. So it could be 33% something, 32% something, and 34% something, and the 34% cause would be the dominant cause amongst 3 causes. Now let's extrapolate that out to 20 possible things contributing to something. If there's 20, then theoretically something could be as small as a 5% cause. Now you could have something that's a 98% cause and the other 2% encompass the other 19 causes, so that something is 98% caused by something and there's 18 or 19 other causes, all of which add up to only 2%. Or with 20 causes, you could have a dominant cause as small as 5%. So as you can imagine, when you get out to 50 causes, the theoretical minimum dominant cause would be 2%. What am I saying by this? Well, take, for instance, some of the fruit roll-ups or other things you can buy at the store where the first ingredient is fruit. But then if you add up the other ingredients, it turns out that the item itself is actually made up of, let's say, 60 or 70% sweeteners. Fruit's just listed first because it's the dominant ingredient. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the biggest ingredient if you lump other things together. So let's bring this anthropogenic analysis back to global warming or climate change for a minute. The UN says man is the dominant cause of global warming. What is the relative percentage? That's all I want to know. Can any scientist, anyone out there? All right, that's enough of that. That's not the whole thing, but I think I can't tell how that's weird thing about this Spreaker virtual deck here. I can play things, but I don't get to hear them myself. And what do I mean by that? I don't get to hear the feedback live. So Dawn was nice enough to hit me with a message, say, the quality doesn't sound so good. I think the callers sound a lot better tonight than they did the other night. So I think we've got that ironed out. I also was going to, I want to see, I have some sound effects here. I can do chimpanzee calls. I'm not sure how those sound. So Dawn, you can tell me how that sounded. And then just because it's thunder and lightning out tonight, I've got the little bowling strikes. I don't know if you can hear it. So, yeah, I got all these little sound chicky-chockies I can do now. So we'll play around with those too, except that I can't hear them. So since I can't hear them, I can't tell the levels, blah, blah, blah. So I got to figure out what the next level of professionalism, production value, whatever you guys want to call it, we're going to need to do to make this happen. So... So I don't know if those sound effects came through or not. I don't know. Although I found it kind of amusing. So I think Don's going to tell me he's typing away. It's talking about chimpanzee screams. That's a guy that types like a monkey. If I had to guess. 717-916-5189 is the talk line number. Again, I want to hear what you guys have to say tonight. Do you think Bo Bergdahl, maybe now that we know that he might have been harshly treated? I know they don't want to call it torture, by the way, because it's not as bad as we treated the guys from the Taliban. So if we say that he was tortured, it would be like saying that Bo Bergdahl was tortured. So that's the downside to Guantanamo Bay, ladies and gentlemen. The mistreatment that we invited on our enemies means that our enemies can now invite that mistreatment on our soldiers and simply say, well, it's not worse than the way you guys did. And that's part of the reason that we probably should have taken a better moral high ground than we have. So I don't know. I have a strong feeling about that Guantanamo is not American in any way, shape, or form. But history will be the judge of that. I'm sure 40 years from now, people will say, "Oh, we'd never do anything like that again." Well, we'll never do that again. I just heard. I'm getting great stuff here. You wish the listeners can control the sound effects. Well, Don, I actually got somebody who just told me that you probably thought that was a mating call. So I'm not even sure who messaged that to me, but we'll figure it out in a little bit. Yeah, the bowling I think sounds good. I think it's pouring rain outside right now. I can't tell for sure because I'm safely ensconced in my living room talking into this puff filter. And, I'm just also, the other thing I got to figure out is how to tune this thing to like take the breath noises out because, or maybe this microphone is just not ideal for this situation. I don't know. When I listen to some of the playback, I can hear a little bit more of my breathing than I would like. I now realize how other people have felt over the years, trapped by my breathing. But nonetheless, it's sort of like, there must be maybe maybe there's somewhere on this board where I can do a little filtering, or maybe there's certain wavelengths that would, if I enhance them a little bit or knock some other ones down, we could clip that sound out. You can do all kinds of cool things like the panning, so you can go to one speaker, or you can go over to the other speaker, or you can go back to the middle. In fact, I've thought about doing that with different callers, like when I'm laughing because the Facebook feed's getting pretty funny tonight. But I've thought about doing that, like when Don calls in, maybe like pan him to the left, and then when one of my other callers calls in, like Dwayne, pan him to the right, because that's sort of how we can separate the two of them. 717-916-5189 if you want to get on the air right now. The person who made the Don mating call joke, Don wants you to call in and join the show. He's offended by what you said, making me laugh. That was probably Lucinda that said that, if I had to guess, right? Yes, it was. There you go, Don. It was Lucinda, so you can start another fight online with her. All seriousness, though, so back to this whole where do we stand? The Boberg thing kind of brings out what I think and starts to expose this underbelly here of opinion on the internet, where we just magically assume that this guy is a traitor and therefore isn't respected or should be because Obama did it. And there's a complex because he traded some terrorists for him, although I don't really think they were terrorists, because maybe they were on some presidential declaration of terrorists at one point, but they weren't on the State Department. The Taliban is not on the State Department terrorist list. And, what is a terrorist and not a terrorist? Well, the difference is really which list they're on, because there's laws that control those designations. Then there's what you consider to be a terrorist, there's what I consider to be a terrorist, and there's what the law considers to be a terrorist. It's sort of like difference between covert and clandestine operations. There's a legal distinction between a military action, a covert operation, and a clandestine operation, and each has separate legal statuses attached to it. And then there's a Mission Impossible team, where you're going to be disavowed if you get caught, and this message will self-destruct in some predetermined period of time. Kittredge, you've never seen me angry. Great line from the movie. But my point on all this is there is a whole different thing going on out there these days. So now we got this meme, right? I got this picture of Hitler and Obama together, and they're basically saying, Obama's just another Hitler. It's kind of mean-spirited, but it moves freely, and it seems to be very popular. And then you have stuff like, again, where people are saying, I wish Obama was more like Putin. Where do we really sit on this? What is the acceptable level of discourse? I mean, people saying stuff like Obama works 24/7 to destroy America. Hillary Clinton has blood on her hands for the war in Benghazi. I mean, does she really have blood on her hands? Really, the security apparatus there probably was as weak there as it was anywhere else. Is it really her problem? What was it like under Bush? I'm always interested for the comparisons. If you told me that, yes, Hillary Clinton actually, lined out the budget for the Benghazi consulate's security and said, no, let's use cheaper subcontractors instead of Marines, I would be interested in it. If you tell me that she allowed the base to maintain the same status quo that it maintained under all the other administrations before it, then I'm interested in it, but I'm not as likely to determine that she is a, blood-soaked, evil Democrat, which is, again, where a lot of this stuff is coming from. A lot of these things are being pushed, and the same things from the Democrats against the Republicans, these mean-spirited, cheap shot imagery, but repeated again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And the weak-minded amongst us may be susceptible to determining that these things are true. And it's like my brother says, he goes, you might have time to read the newspaper all the time and think about this or that, but most people don't. Or he's like, I don't get my news from the newspaper, and I don't watch a lot of TV. So when I do, I go online, I look some stuff up. We were having a conversation about that last night, and he was saying, you can't assume everybody is seeing the same things. That everything is everybody is. Lucinda, Don really wants you to come on the air now. I'm sure if you called in, he'd call at the same time. And Don, I want to make sure you know that Lucinda's husband looks a lot tougher than you. I just want to make sure you're aware of that. He could probably kick your ass, actually, based on my just rough guess. But I'm very proud of myself when I set everybody up for a fight. 717-916-5189, by the way, if anybody wants to get here on the air and kind of react or tell me what you think about these things. I'm honored I have so many listeners. I'd be honored if more of you would become callers, though. And I'm going to start I'm going to start calling you guys up. That's what I'm going to do. I can do these free Facebook calls somehow, I think, right? Where I just go right through Facebook and dial you up. I don't know if anybody else has used that yet, but the one day my phone lit up and somebody was calling me through Facebook, and I'm like, what the hell is this? I've never seen this before. And I guess it was just Facebook, ringing through like a free telephone. Who would have thunk it? 717-916-5189. So if you don't want to be the first person for me to call out of the blue, we might want to be careful about that. Actually, what we do need to do here. Let's see here. I'm going to punch in a series of numbers into my little pad here. And then let's see what happens here. I'm going to try to ring up. What I should do is call the wrong number and keep asking for my mother and pretend I can't tell that it's the wrong number. You know what I mean? Like I would call the person and be like, hey, Mom, how are you? And they tell me they're not their mom. I'd be like, he's insisting that they're my mom or their dad. If it's the guy, I better say dad, right? That would be a pretty good radio shtick. Of course, the fact that I'm broadcasting live will violate like 8 state laws. And not just this state's, I'm sure. Maybe we could secretly record a billionaire talking about the N-word. That would always be interesting, too. I don't think she's going to be around. We may have to leave her a message. What?
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system.
What could she possibly... Okay, it's the right number. What the hell could she be doing on a night like tonight?
Tone, please record your message.
All right, we'll leave her a message. What do you want me to tell her?
Or press 1 for more options. To leave a callback number, press 5.
Hey, Mom, this is terrible radio. Where the hell are you? Damn it. Oh, just kidding. Love you. Talk to you later. Yeah, that's good. That's good for her. Give her a little guff. She'll be like, I missed it. I didn't call her ahead of time to tell her I wanted her on or anything. I always figure, why give her a heads up? Oh, we got to Skype her. All right, Skype call. Call again because you didn't come through because we were busy Skyping out. So I know somebody just called me. Let's see. Who just called? Was that my mom calling back? It could have been. It could have been. Oh, she was. She was calling us back. Well, so let's try her again. We'll try her again. I think she must actually maybe have picked up the phone. I know this is making for very slow radio right now. 717-916-5189 if I get on the air when we get my mom off the air. So we'll see. That would probably wake her up. Yeah,
hello.
Hey, Mother, how are you? You're live on the air. How are you?
I'm fine. I kind of guessed I was live on the air.
All right, I was giving you fair warning. I didn't.
Okay, all right.
How are
you?
Well, I'm good. I didn't want you giving out any family secrets, before.
That's right. And you're not supposed to tell any either.
That's right. Well, only if they pay enough.
Yeah. Guess where I am right now?
What are you up to?
I'm at the Big Dipper having a nice dish of ice cream.
Oh, okay. Well, good dealio. Now, is it sunny and warm up there?
No, it's not. As a matter of fact, it's rained and it turned very cool, and it's kind of almost like a fallish evening.
Well, that would make me want to go out and get an ice cream too.
Well, they make Italian ice cream, and they make limoncello ice cream, and it's really good.
Good. How's your garden?
Anyways.
How's your garden coming along? Any updates since last week?
Yeah, it actually is growing. I looked at it today, and it's starting to, hang in there and start to, all the little plants are really starting to grow. And I just thought I'm going to plant some beans this week. I got it all set up for it.
I was tying my tomatoes up today just to make sure. I figured, I knew it was going to be a little windier, so I figured probably a good time to get them because they were getting to that point where they needed tied, Yep,
I know it. I know you got to do it. And I'm looking at today at all the bracing and tomato cages and things I have, and I'll put them out by next weekend.
Yeah, that's a pretty good idea. I also have one of the tomato plants I planted this year is very bushy. It's sort of it's one of these hybrid bushy ones that's supposed to not really need a lot of tying up, and it's kind of neat. It's much thicker in the stem. The leaves are a little stubbier, and it seems like it's kind of going to do as advertised. Be very bushy versus just regular tomato plants can be like 16 feet long. Just they're all tied in knots.
Yeah, I know. And how interesting, but let me know how that goes, because that might be something to look forward to next year to plant.
Yes.
For me, and I don't know what else I'm doing. I did a lot of things like put some of the end of winter things away today and get out some more spring summer things.
Very nice.
So that's what I did today.
So okay. And, have you been following this Bo Bergdahl Taliban exchange?
I have to some degree. I mean, I'm not waiting with bated breath or anything at the news media, listening to the news media, but I have heard of what's going on, and I think it's really a shame.
What's your general read on
that it had to go down that way? Well, that the young man was trying to go over to the other side, and apparently they didn't want him either, but they thought he was not real. And, so he's been kept in captivity, which probably wasn't really, really great for almost 5 years. And I don't know what you can make of that, but I think that we got to get our priorities straight and do things by the book, so to speak, which didn't happen in this case.
Okay. I would fight with you if you weren't my mother a little bit, but my issue with it was that I feel like Obama couldn't win on this one, because had he not brought him back, and then it was leaked that we had an opportunity to bring him back, they'd be saying he's the first president to abandon a soldier in the history of the country.
That's true. That could have happened. I mean, when you look at it from different points of view, I think maybe, I don't know. I just don't know. But if you look at it from different points of view, that could have been the case.
The other thing the other thing I've seen is interesting is, as I've gone back and looked, done a little digging, it's pretty clear that these 5 Taliban guys' names were named as the people they were going to release. And actually back in 2013 or somewhere in there, I'm trying to think how far back, or another year, 12, there was going to be an exchange, and it got shot down by Hamid Karzai because he didn't want us dealing with the Taliban. And so he's the one who pulled the plug on it a while ago. But the point is at least these particular gentlemen who were released, and I'll use gentlemen loosely, obviously, they weren't like, this wasn't completely out of the blue the way it's being portrayed, where people are like, how did this happen? How did they let these 5 guys go? They've been talking about releasing these 5 guys to the Taliban as part of a deal for a long time.
I think I remember some of those names in times past, and so they were talked about. So
what Obama violated was the 30-day notice to Congress of the intent to release, and that's an interesting question, because he's sort of saying, well, we had to do it. And I would say the real politic of it is had they given Congress the names, they couldn't trust Congress to keep it secret, and that would have been a problem. So, but I don't know if his violation of the law will ultimately be justifiable or not. It's possible he can make an argument. It seems like they're sort of spaghettiing it against the wall. Like, well, he looks sick. It was we didn't, we weren't sure. But there is some other interesting things that I've read that seem to indicate that the government originally with Bo Bergdahl never had a really strong, like the Taliban actually complained that they didn't know who to talk to because there were so many different U.S. agencies allegedly in charge of this or working on it at any given moment, that they didn't have a clear picture on who could actually cut a deal with them or not, and that didn't get straightened out till closer to the end, showing again. Yeah, go ahead.
That's not unusual for government, for people in one area not to know what others are doing and not to and all having some sort of jurisdiction but not complete jurisdiction.
Right. There were
government in a way.
There are probably more people in the federal government than there are in the Taliban, right?
Well, that could be.
So
that could be.
So who do you talk to? And that's always an interesting question. It's probably they called the VA helpline and they were put on hold for 3 years while they were trying to figure out how to get a hold of this guy.
Well, and that's what happens to people. You kind of ooze down into the cracks after you've been online or waiting for the phone to somebody to pick up your phone and listen to what you have to say when it comes to government. It's pretty interesting. You can get batted back and forth like 10, 12 times before you find the right person. And every once in a while you find one that is willing to help you and to go the extra mile and make sure that it gets straightened out.
Did you?
So there's always those good people in there too.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember going to get my swine flu vaccine, which was probably actually something else to do with the alien invasion, since allegedly there was UFOs over Carlisle yesterday, which somebody was trying to tell me about.
Oh, really?
Somebody, right? Well, supposedly,
oh
but trust me, there's a lot of drunks and crazy people, and there was a car show in town. So between all those things, and the fact that my brother was actually in town, so it may have been just the glow of Kurt's head, that big bold orb up in the air.
Could be.
So people were claiming there was UFOs in Carlisle, and if somebody who's listening wants to call in and tell us about them, because I didn't hear. I mean, I don't have anything credible on it. I just have some rumors. 717-916-5189. We'll always be happy to hear your freaky UFO stories. But this whole thing with the VA, for instance. I'm sure you've followed that in the news a little bit.
Yes, I have.
But that's one of those ones where it reminds me of people are like, I'm shocked. I'm so shocked, and you're really like everybody who's ever had any relation with anybody who's remotely military will tell you that most of these guys, for instance, would tell me, like we have Lebanon VA hospital around here. Everybody sort of likes the VA hospital. Sometimes they don't have, it's like any other hospital. They sort of like it, but they're always perturbed by the fact that they can't get in, or I had to wait for this, or it took forever to do that, or when I applied for my benefits, I waited a year and a half. But that's been going on for 20 years. So this whole like hand-wringing, what happened is really just bullshit.
That has been going on for a long time, and I know people who were cut out of their benefits because they all of a sudden put an income limit on things. So I know people in our area, and I know people in our area like the Veterans Hospital, both in Erie and in Buffalo, that they speak highly of it in most cases.
Right.
So, everybody has an opinion, that's for sure. Well, listen, you have kept me.
Yeah, we'll let you.
Here.
We'll let you get back to. We'll get you back to your ice cream before it melts. I apologize.
Well, yeah, that probably be a good idea because it looks like it is. So, have a good evening.
All right, love you, Mom.
Bye.
Bye.
Love you too. Bye.
Who cares about her ice cream? We have a show to do, woman. What's the matter with you? Notice I say those things when she's off the air. All right, so there you go. My mom apparently doesn't have the right idea when it comes to Bo Bergdahl. We'll just continue to try to educate her onto my opinion so that she can come around to her, wake up to her senses. 717-916-5189. If you want a link to that ice cream shop she was in, forget it because it's all the way up there in Western New York. Unless, of course, you happen to be listening from Western New York, and then you probably already know where it is because it's a small rural area where everybody knows where everything is. So it's kind of a trick question there because if you live there and you tell me you don't know where it is, then I pretty much know you don't live there. we're talking about a town with like one pizza shop, okay? And there's not too many joints to get ice cream in if you follow. Oh, there's a bar, though. I used to sneak in there when I was 16. Imagine that. Go up for mussels and drink a beer while you did it. See the local police officer there. Say, wave hello. He'd wave hello. That's what I love about rural towns, It was no big deal back in those days. Why, we'd go up and these boys would get some beer and the cops would come up and then they'd catch you with the beer and then they would take the beer. And the beer would magically end up at the cop's house. We all knew this because one of the cop's sons used to then recycle the beer back that his dad confiscated from various teenage parties back to other teenage parties. So it was kind of like an ecosystem of beer. Now, I'm not sure if that would wash in the modern era or not, but it definitely should. My world would be a much happier place if that were the case. I love nothing better than all these poor young college students getting underage drinkings. And the people who arrest them acting all indignant, like, how dare they? And you want to be like, dude, you were in college too. We all know that you did all the same thing. Well, I did, but I know better now. 717-916-5189 if you want to join the conversation. Lucinda or Dawn, I'm sure the two of you seem to have been going back and forth on Facebook quite a little bit. So if you got something you want to pop in on, or you want to comment on my mom's fine appearance, feel free. 717-916-5189. You can never say the talk line number too many times, I am told. I have to keep laughing because if you could follow the feed on the Facebook, Don and Lucinda have been going back and forth, and they're getting each other all at Twitter. So hopefully one of the two of them will get excited and call in. No, but seriously, I guess I was back on the Bo Bergdahl. I was on the whole idea. But I wanted to get back on the global warming for just a few minutes, too. I played you that little clip, and it goes back. This is the essential issue. And Don had mentioned this earlier, Pascal's challenge. Why not just do it? And that's a good question. Why not just do it? And the answer is because the economic cost may be too great. If we rejigger our entire economy and we slow down our economy and stop the growth and stop the trickle down of wealth to the rest of the world and stop the incredible advancements that are going on in technology and science, it might not be worth it. So I'm not saying that we wouldn't act if the information were solid. What I'm saying is the information is not solid. And we're told that it's solid. People hint to us, oh, it's solid. Oh, trust me, it's really solid. It's really, really solid. Well, I don't know if it's really, really solid or not. In fact, they won't give you the number that you need. And I had posted an article on global warming that talks about some of the issues, and it raised the same issue I did, which is nobody seems to be able to tell us if a scientist says that they believe anthropogenic global warming exists, and that's global warming created by human beings. The next question would be, what portion of the warming or climate change is attributable to that? And that's the question nobody wants to answer. And I say nobody wants to answer it because I have a feeling that if we get the answer, we would know that it's a very insignificant portion. And as a result, it's nothing that you or I should be reworking or changing our lives over. And as a result, it would be immediately discarded and forgotten. Now, I'm sure they'll tell us, well, we believe it could be very much a large portion, even though we don't know. So we felt if we told our level of uncertainty, that would cause policymakers and the public not to support this. And is there some evidence of that? Yeah, there was a scientist recently whose paper was rejected because he pointed out some discrepancies in the global warming numbers. And one of the things that the reviewer said that this would be unfortunate to be published because it would give credence to the argument that the science isn't as certain, and that would be dangerous because we don't want the public thinking that the science isn't certain. And so, right, the fact that the science isn't certain can't be known because that would cause the public to think that the science isn't certain. So I think what we learned from that and that exchange of information is that it's not as simple as there is global warming and or climate change caused by man and caused by man to such an extent that reductions on what men is doing will have a meaningful change on it. And some people say, well, we should do whatever we can anyhow. And that kind of goes back to that Pascal's challenge. Okay, then fill your swimming pools in so your kids don't drown. Start driving at 5 miles per hour because you'll stop all traffic accidents. Stop building campfires. Yeah, campfires. Okay, Don, you're on the air.
Oh, well, I want to ask you about we were talking about global warming.
Yes.
Okay, the thought just occurred to me, you mentioned the impact on agriculture, that just slight variations in climate, the impact it has on a lot of third world countries. So, which is going to have the worst impact?
Well, listen, here's the answer. We don't know. And so here's an interesting question. What if we crunched the numbers and we decided that, in fact, climate change is caused by man, and there's going to be climate disruption, but actually at the end, in the next 20 years, there's going to be more farmable land than there was before? Should we then keep going?
Well, that's kind of the joke that a lot of conservatives like to put out there. Well, if it's warming, that's great because you can now sell property in Greenland and places like that. I don't think that's what's going to happen.
Well, no, and I don't know what's going to happen. That's why I keep saying I want data. Before I make a decision, I want to know. And I feel like what they don't want to tell us is that they don't really know. Because if they tell us what they don't really know, then there's no reason to feel like we really need to act. And it costs benefit now.
You can look at paleo environments and ice core samples. They can go back tens of thousands of years.
And we know, and we know that we know that it's been a lot warmer and it's been a lot cooler. In fact, my favorite thing out in California, they're like, this is the worst drought in 500 years. And it's evidence of. And I'm like, okay, no, it's not the worst drought ever. It's the worst drought in 500 years, which means 500 years ago there was a drought just as bad. And maybe 1,000 years before that there was a drought just as bad. And maybe 1,000,000 years ago it was even drier. And 2 million years before that, that piece of land was under the ocean. That's why I feel like, there was these great certainties that this means something is lost in the geological time scale.
Well, there are a lot of extinctions that occurred because of climate change.
Well, there were a lot of extinctions that occurred long before men existed.
There is a biological consequence to climate change.
But extinction is normal.
There's some theory even that dinosaur farts caused the extinction of, there was some sort of mass, which I always love to say dinosaur farts, but, that the methane gas produced from these huge herbivore animals was enough to, impact the environment in a catastrophic way.
Right.
So it's not hard. The environment is very delicate.
But
we've
then
never had an industrial revolution before, so we have no idea what releasing fossil fuels into the environment.
No, I agree. I agree with that.
That has some impact.
I certainly think it could. On the other hand,
an experiment I thought we would perform with one of your listeners. We'll take 2 garage bays, and we'll back a car into one, and somebody like my friend Colorado Joe can sit in the car with the motor running, and we'll shut the door, and I'll go into the other garage bay, no car, nothing running, and we'll see who comes out at the end of the day. There's some impact, the fossil fuel has some impact on the environment.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's no doubt that it could have some impact but of what magnitude and what significance. And that's a good example you gave, which is in an enclosed space. How much carbon dioxide can our atmosphere absorb with no real meaningful effect? And that's what we just don't know. We don't know. On the other hand,
possibly when it's too late.
On the other hand, it's not completely clear that humans are completely altering the climate change, because it could turn out that the carbon dioxide concentration changes are so low as to be definitely inconsequential, that in fact things like the level of solar output and the wobble of the Earth's rotation.
Carl, that's the problem. Those things build up in the environment.
Well,
to the point where it would just drop off catastrophically.
Well, it's always interesting too what might happen with the CO2 if the algae starts blooming and eating it all up. And listen, I understand we're releasing carbon into the atmosphere. On the other hand, I maintain that there was the cyanobacteria that released oxygen into the atmosphere years ago and completely terraformed the Earth and poisoned most of the living creatures off the Earth by their waste product oxygen. So maybe it's just a perfectly natural process for a species to excrete a substance into the air and change the environment. I mean, if that's nature, hey, let's roll with it, baby.
Well, I certainly think we can react to it, though.
Right, but that may be unnatural because no other animal's ever reacted to its own. No yeast goes, hey boys, let's stop making alcohol here because we're about to kill ourselves off.
No, we're not going to do that. We won't be stopping any alcohol.
So, I'm just saying, the yeast are laying around and they make the alcohol as a waste product until it builds up sufficiently for me to drink it. And of course, they die off at a certain point. So you pick your yeast strains by how strong you want your beer. So it's just not natural to adjust your outputs. So maybe it would be an unnatural act for human beings to self-regulate. I'm just getting philosophical on you.
That seems like a stretch, Carl.
I know. I'm just getting philosophical.
Why wouldn't we want to do things that benefit it's a mutually beneficial proposition? Like, what can we do that will benefit the greatest number of people?
And Don, I have another caller on with us too. Who have I got? Dwayne?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Dwayne and Don, you guys are on together.
I can add something to this conversation on a somewhat professional level. I'm in the car business. Been in the car business all my life. And if you take that 1974 Ford Gran Torino Elite for a drive, you are polluting what 1,000 modern vehicles today pollute. So, as you want to decide if man is responsible for global warming, I would say if we haven't changed our standards since 1974, I would say we'd be in a rough world. But it's not that bad. It's not that bad. Your lawnmower creates more pollution than probably 500 to 1,000 cars on the road today. You understand the point here?
We have an EPA that helps us protect those kind of things, like our environment.
Well,
right, and it's because of those agencies and their regulations, but yet it's also added quite a cost to the vehicle itself, to the tune of probably a couple $1,000s.
Yeah, if you want
it seems like there are a lot more cars on the road now than there were in the 70s.
Of course, yes. But I said the ratio right now today of pollution is 1,000 to 1.
Now the carbon.
We've made huge leaps in environmental, whatever you want to say. They don't do what they did.
Either. I mean, there's India and China and all the developing countries in the world are pumping pollution into the industry.
Which is also another interesting question. Do we make ourselves less productive and absorb these kinds of costs if it's not going to make a difference because nobody else is going to participate?
I think to this point, as far as cars, which is the only thing my expertise is in, we've made leaps and bounds, strides in progress.
But that would be
at what cost? And how much impact did we lessen on the environment? And I think we've lessened on the impact huge.
Well, I think fuel-injected engines run a hell of a lot better than carbureted engines. They're more efficient.
Yeah, and then they have
but it goes way beyond
that. But if there wouldn't have been regulations, we wouldn't have those kind of vehicles.
What's the catalytic converter?
Now we have we have hybrids, we have all these. We're moving forward in technology, and that's the idea, right? That's how the new technology of alternate energies will change our economy.
But in the future,
new opportunity.
In the future, we also run into these problems, for instance, with these mercury in our bulbs now, right? So now every bulb has to have mercury in it in order to meet these guidelines. So we had to put these potentially more toxic substances into our homes in exchange for efficiency. And so I don't think it's always linear where it goes. And then if you start looking at the chemicals that are in a typical battery, like don't take the battery out of your cell phone and chew on it because you won't live excessively long, The lithium and the nickel and the cadmium. Yeah. Lithium would be good for some of my callers. There's no doubt about that. in a therapeutic.
And not you, Dwayne, or me, because we're different.
Right, you guys are special.
We actually have the cojones to call in and talk to Carl.
Oh, no. That's true. 717-916-5189. Although it could be open for debate whether all the callers would have cojones or not, or about 50% of our callers may not, Don. I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, I don't know. I can't tell by the pictures,
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, well, actually, I thought you were a woman for the longest time until you called, too. So, you know.
I have feminine qualities, don't get me wrong.
And I can also add a little bit to it. I have a friend of mine that now, they build clean coal plants for a living. And he told me that the strides they're making in coal for clean coal is leaps and bounds huge. To the tune of, stuff like 500,000% gains or reductions in emissions.
Yeah, and
that's important.
And they have some now. I know they're testing this carbon scrubbing technology where the CO2 then gets sequestered somehow, so it doesn't go into the atmosphere. You know what they do with a lot of that CO2, besides make soda pop, is they actually pump it down into wells, to pressurize gas wells and push it down into the ground, or oil wells rather. And so it gets pumped back into the ground. I don't know what happens to it, 5,000 years from now. But I guess I don't really care either, right?
Hey, Dwayne, I wanted to ask you something. I'm sorry, Carl.
Oh, go ahead.
I was talking about Vladimir Putin and, the pictures of him, fishing naked or half naked or whatever that is. When I saw this, to me, that looked like it was like a gay calendar pose.
Say that again?
I'm so surprised there's so many guys who are real macho guys, and they like this guy who's sort of like a fruit kind of.
He's quite the man.
Are you guys having a bromance with Mr. Putin? Oh.
He's a character. I like him. I like his character.
Well, I heard you say that. That's why I'm asking you this question. You like him, but why?
I like his character. I didn't say I like everything he stood for, but I like his personal character.
Well, that's an interesting question too, all by itself. If we want to rate politicians, and maybe this is one of the problems in a democracy, is we vote for the people we like, maybe not necessarily people that would be better. And so, O.J. Simpson's a great example. He seemed like a really nice guy when you heard him interviewed, right? And then we learned some stuff about him from the criminal episode, and then we learned some more about how he really was, And then you've got a guy like Howard Stern who seems really dirty on the air, but people say that if you know him in his private life, that's just a shtick that he does for the air, and it doesn't reflect how he actually acts in the real world. And so we tend to fall in love with the images of the stars and the politicians and the famous people and the personas that they project, but they may have very little correlation with how they actually perceive the world or how they actually will act when put in charge.
And then you compare that with Obama, who is eloquent. He's very educated. He's an excellent speaker.
I think one of the senators called him articulate.
Articulate.
Yeah, I think Harry Reid
had said. You have to be careful living in the South how you say that. Harry
Reid, I think, was the one who said that Obama was articulate. And got himself in some, a little bit of Harry Reid hot water for that. But no, and I see, this is the thing. I still think Bill Clinton's probably the most personable president in a long time in terms of just how friendly he is, or however you want to say his amazing skill over people, so to speak.
Yeah, but you got to admit, Obama is a family man. There's no scandal. He ain't cheating. He's not playing around. He's not a stud muffin. His wife is a good woman. He's got 2 children. He's an excellent role model for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I also firmly believe that it was important that America elect an African American as president, because it sort of puts us in the perspective where no one can say that race is any longer an overriding factor in our. It still is a factor in our society, but it's no longer so overriding that it can't be set aside. And
but at least now we can say, since we don't have Bush anymore, that at least we have a president that can make a full sentence on his own.
Exactly. Bush was such a source for comedians. What a dummy.
If it was more than 4 letters for Bush, he couldn't do it, man. That boy just could not speak.
Yeah, and I have no, and people that listened to me back in the day on WHP know, I didn't have any love for Sarah Palin. I didn't have any love for George Bush. I used to make fun of them a lot. I had no love for Obama. I had no love for anybody. What can I tell you? But at one point, and I did say this the other day on the show, like when Bush was asked a question one time about criticizing Obama, because Cheney had come out hard against Obama on something he did, and Bush said, "I'm not the president anymore. I don't know what information he had available to him, so I can't second guess him because how would I know whether it was the right decision or not without knowing what he knew?" And
you have Cheney telling them what to think.
And I really like the fact that Bush said it that way, because that's not the bumbling persona that you expect from him, or the sort of strident. My problem with Bush is I think he was a nice guy. I think he just like Obama loves his country. I think they both love the country, and they both try to do, and Obama tries to do the best he can. But obviously, they both come from a worldview. So Bush brings along all his Texas buddies, Karl Rove and those guys, right? And boy, the thunder and lightning is just smacking away out there.
Every time I think of Bush, I think of Bob Durkin and his cowboy hat and his cowboy boots.
Right,
I'm sorry.
And then on the other hand. No, I just like that answer from Bush, because I was really not the stereotype that he'd been pigeonholed into to just shoot off or not make any sense. It was just a really fair answer, too. But it was important because he was basically saying, Cheney may be saying this, but let me tell you how it really is. And I just thought it was a very kind thing for him to do. I also do find it fascinating by how many things Obama's done that are actually just extensions of Bush programs, but for some reason it's part of an evil Democratic conspiracy to destroy the world.
Well, you guys all hate the ACA, and that's Romney care. We would have got the same thing no matter who got elected.
And
I
was opposed to it when Massachusetts put it in place years ago, so I'm at least intellectually consistent on that one.
Hindsight is 20/20.
So, hey, Carl.
Yes.
Question for you. Are we ready for a third party yet in this country? A viable third party.
We could use a third party, and one thing that will have to happen, if a viable third party comes up, one of the things that viable third party is going to quickly have to do, and this may only work if this party can get ensconced in some states, is to remove all the rules and all the regulations that have been completely designed by the Republicans and the Democrats to keep a third party from effective ballot access. They make it very difficult for anybody but them to show up on the ballots in most places. And they make it very difficult for people to get their deadlines and their registrations and their signatures, and they get free passes themselves on all this stuff, because if you were in the top 2 parties in the previous election, here's a rule. If you were one of the top 2 vote-getting parties in the previous election, then you need not do. Well, guess who the top 2 vote-getting parties always are? You know what I mean?
Republicans and Democrats.
Right. So they've completely written a structure into place and ruthlessly enforced it. And like I always say, with a wink and a nod to each other. That's the one thing they can always agree on. And then they've cut the states up where whoever's in charge gets the lion's share, but there's always a little gentleman's agreement or gentle ladies agreement, whatever you want to call it in this day and age, where they say, okay, yeah, we're going to get 7 out of the 12 districts, but you can have 5 out of the 12. So we'll cut them up in a way that guarantees us 7 and guarantees you 5 for the next 10 years till the next census.
Deal? Gerrymandering.
Yes, absolutely. And it's done, the states control it, and they lock out, and they make it so that everybody's electorally secure. So, see, it's really interesting because you think your vote matters, and your vote really doesn't matter because we already knew how you were going to vote on average, and we lumped you together with a bunch of other similarly minded people so that you couldn't vote against the people who would vote in the other direction. I mean, it's just completely crazy.
So what's the
I'm not a big
solution?
fan of that.
Well, the solution...
Conservatives are notorious for doing that sort of thing, too.
And Democrats.
Reconfiguring.
I'm telling you, the only reason the conservatives have been doing it in the last 15 years, my friend, is because they stole a lot of the state elections. Back when Ridge was sweeping and the Republican governors, 15 years ago when Tom Ridge swept into office, all these other Republicans and the giant midterm loss, there was a huge influx of Republicans in the state legislatures. And they've been doing what the Democrats did for years before. And in places where the Democrats have taken back over, they've dutifully begun to disassemble and reverse it. But magically, the one thing they can, like I say, the way they do it is if it's a 70%er for a Democrat and a 70%er for a Republican, they leave them alone. And then they create maybe one or two possible districts where there's a problem. And those are the ones that then horse trade over. It's just crazy. It's just absolutely insane. So what does a third party need to do? A third party needs to remove the structural barriers. A third party needs to probably start in a state or two and win power in those states and then use their power there to restructure it, which actually means a third party, which, you hear these third party candidates at the national level, third party candidates are going to have to take over a state legislature somewhere. And it's hard to get people enthused on state legislator elections,
And third party,
like Ross Perot was our last ditch effort.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was pretty nice.
That's
the deal back then.
So Dawn, Avery wants to know if she missed anything, I think.
No, not really.
Yeah, it's Dawn. Nothing to speak of.
No, what are you talking about? This has been an awesome show.
She may have missed. She missed this.
She missed your mom.
Did she? That's my thunder.
I didn't miss your mom, Carl.
That's got to be a regular segment.
The bowling strike or no? My mom. Yeah, I try to bring my mom on fairly frequently.
Okay. Everybody on Facebook said that's something you do regularly. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I couldn't get WHP. Sorry.
Yeah, that's cool. No, yeah, and I would bring my mom on, and she'd give us some recipes. In fact, we'll start posting some of her recipes. Now, here's
if I lived in Carlisle, believe me, I would have listened to WHP.
National Socialism is how one would explain Hitler being a liberal. Get educated. Can't stand low information voters anymore. They seem to be some of the most uneducated, over-opinionated people I have ever had to listen to. They cry for proof. You give it to them. They ask for more, never satisfied that someone knows better than them. To the person who arbitrarily said Obama just needs to kill more Jews, no matter what sarcastic point you were trying to make, it was tasteless at best, insensitive no matter what, and completely irrelevant even to the Post. That was to this picture of Vorwärts and forward with Hitler and Obama. That's his name.
Well, when you're simple-minded, there's always a boogeyman. And that's how you're manipulated, because somebody will tell you there's a boogeyman, and that will influence you, and they'll use fear and emotion.
And that's one of
you from the boogeyman.
And that's one of the arguments on global warming, is that global warming is the new boogeyman, that there has to be something to be afraid of, that we all have to change everything.
No, that's
no, it couldn't be that.
Hey, I got to cut out on you, Carl.
All right, my friend, go back to work, sell a car.
Yeah. Fixing cars.
All right.
Cars. All right.
Talk to you later.
See you, man.
Later, Dwayne.
Yeah. Go fix a car. All right. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Don, what do you do for a living? Do we know? Does anybody know what you do for a living?
I don't do anything for a living. I'm a liberal. I live off the system.
So I figured. You kind of like, how many grandkids did you make your daughter have so you can get extra money?
I'm a welfare king, brother. Isn't that what everybody thinks?
I don't know.
No, actually, I'm self-employed, just like Dwayne. I'm a small businessman.
Okay. So it's possible to be a small businessman and be a Democrat at the same time. I've never heard of that.
Absolutely. I can't imagine being a Republican.
I've never heard of that before.
Oh, please.
This is interesting. We were talking about regulation earlier, and I was talking about, the tariffs on the cabs and things like that. Anybody wants to jump in on this conversation, by the way, it's 717-916-5189. Again, 717-916-5189. Dial up the talk line, get in here, and you can chitty-chat with us.
I can see your listeners out there, coached up in anxiety. They want to say something, but they just are too chicken to call in.
Well, and actually, that's
on the stats. There's only 200 people listening.
I'll tell you.
It's like 10 now and 20 throughout the week, and you know what I mean.
Well, I'll tell you.
Don't be afraid. Call.
Exactly. Call. Damn it. No, but I'll tell you what happens. And I know with on the radio, people will be like, "It's my first time. I was kind of nervous." And it's really less intimidating than you think it is, but it's sort of like public speaking, So the idea that everybody else is going to be listening to you. You obviously don't have a problem with public speaking, Don. I have a feeling you've probably been told to shut up a few times in your life, just like me. But you know what I'm saying? It's if you have if you don't have a fear, if you don't have a fear of public speaking, it's very different. And so, interesting little thing. Bob Durgan told me one time they were having some kind of tax rally at the Capitol where WHP all shows up, and
he's your mentor, right?
Yes.
He's sort of your,
yes, he told me a lot. But
I won't tease about it anymore. I'm sorry.
God, he's in late 60s, 70. I forget how old he is. He says he's retired now, but he says he's like I hate speaking in public, and he goes, nobody believes me when I say that. He says because I sit in here and I talk to 50,000 people every afternoon, and I yell at callers, and I got no problem doing it. He's like, but I don't like standing up in front of a crowd and talking. He says, I hate it. I don't like it. It's not comfortable. It doesn't feel natural. I don't want to do it. I only do it because I have to. And it was funny because there's a guy, who's regularly talking to gazillions of listeners on the air. But just the idea of public speaking without being behind the microphone and in a room where you don't see anybody, completely changed his psychology of his how he felt about it. And so I know for a lot of callers, it's just they haven't been through this before, so they really don't know what to expect.
Well, they need to break the ice because some of them are very funny on Facebook, whether they're trying to be or not. They need to call it. It'd be an awesome show. It's entertainment, people. It's not. This isn't school. Nobody's judging you. It's entertainment.
Yeah, no, and I know we have some funny. They say some really funny stuff on Facebook. So
awesome. You need to come on the air and say that stuff because nobody's going to, we'll have fun with it.
Which is also, if you are listening to this show and you haven't gone to the Carl Rominger show or my own personal page, I keep it all public on there. So feel free to jump on and take a look because there is probably, while I've glossed over, some different ideas, there is some pretty interesting posts where people do kind of give some good, we've got the funny stuff and we've got the more serious stuff on there. And people do give some really interesting viewpoints and counter viewpoints and we get some threads going. And so there's a whole other aspect to this show that takes place off the air and on the Facebook, usually in the hour before and the hour after. And sometimes in the in-between days too, because I like to keep things hopping on there whenever possible.
That's the cool thing about the show, Carl. It's a little bit of everything. You learn something, you just
laugh
a little,
That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep it eclectic. And also, somebody might say, well, why do you always have Dawn on, well, because as long as you're halfway intelligent caller, and you're halfway there, we might as well keep you on.
I'm 25% intelligent.
Because you're 25%, right. If you fall below 25% intelligent, we're going to have to cut you off the show. And
I'm raising the bar, lowering the bar for you people.
Right.
If I can call,
right.
You should be able to call.
Avery, you're 26%. Get on here. 717-916-5189. Seriously, so the idea is over time, if we can build up enough callers, obviously then we get to the point where we're like, Don, you call in, I give you 5 minutes and I get ready because we got 20 more people. But on the other hand, I like the idea that in this format, we don't have to do that. Like we can, for instance, do what we just did a minute ago, which is, hey, you're on, you're sounding okay. Dwayne's on, he's sounding okay. Well, hell, let's add a third person because as long as everybody gets how you talk in a format like this. And let me tell you another idea I have, which I really want to implement down the road. And you're part of this idea, Don. Let me explain. I want to do a call-in show where we put together like a little jury. Actually, you and Dwayne might need to be the jury. That might be a good idea. So of course, Dwayne will keep leaving on us, but he'll miss half the case like a real judge. So Dwayne and you, for instance, will be the jury, right? Or my other buddy Reggie. So we put like Reggie, you, and Dwayne, okay? And then we have some idiot call in and tell us about something, how somebody wronged them, and maybe even get the other idiot on the phone, and then we have like a little people's court thing go on. We'll each give their sides of the story. Then you guys ask them questions. I'll moderate it, and then you guys have to vote on who's the bigger idiot. We could even call it like who's the bigger idiot, I lent my roommate $500 and she never paid it back. That wasn't no rent. I was owed $1,000 in rent. Who knows? That wasn't no loan. That was rent. They'll go back and forth, and then I paid the utility bill. And then you guys will say you both make no sense, And of course, it won't be like the real people's court where you get money or to see Judge Judy's doily. This would be just sort of on the radio, but I think it would be funny because you'd be a good personality for it, and then we get a couple other, and Dwayne would, and get somebody else with a little bit maybe even a crazy woman on there.
Well, Carl, we're going to have to start talking about some pecuniary remuneration here.
Well, let me put it this way, Don. If the show ever made money, and I knew what pecuniary meant, I would be the first to discuss.
I think going down to the ice cream shop and talking about some little action on that. Too.
So my mom's at the Big Dipper. I'm like, is that code for something? What is she talking about? I'm like, the Big Dipper, aliens here. And did you hear this? I wonder if anybody out there actually heard about these aliens in Carlisle. Listen, you chickens, if you can't call in and talk about these aliens in Carlisle, post it on my Facebook page, because somebody was claiming to me today that people were citing aliens in Carlisle last night.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, well, the car show was in town, so I'm 50-50 on whether they just saw some Fords rolling up and down and got confused. 717-916-5189. 717-916-5189. I said to my buddy, it says a cigar shop, or the tattoo shop. It was an old cigar shop, but then went down more as a tattoo shop. And I said, hey, Steve, I said, I see that the average size of something has gone down in Carlisle again. And that's always my reference to whenever they put out the little car parades, and I'm sure you guys can read in between the lines. And somebody else said, yeah, but not as much as during the Corvette show.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. We're bad like that. But, hey, it was fun. So anyhow, you get the concept here. So now everybody listening, I want you to think about this. Maybe you have a friend who'd be perfect for this. Obviously, the more bipolar they are, the more likely they are to shack up with skeevy guys or girls. I mean, these would be the perfect litigants for this format, right? We want
people like that.
We want people that are fighting over weird stuff too, like, I don't know, a toaster or I don't know, a baby seat.
Brainstorm on this one.
Yeah, like a dog cage. I don't know. Maybe the dog itself. That's always
It's a good sound bit.
The dog, right? Exactly. Actually, though, the dog itself, we could do dog custody court. We could do custody cases for couples.
That's a good one. Everybody loves the doggy.
We could do pet custody decisions for people that are splitting up over who should get the animal and what the visitation terms should be. That would be pretty good, actually, because that actually could be a whole. And trust me on this, I see this in the future. Right now, courts really don't entertain dog custody, but now that people are spending gazillions of dollars on their dogs, some state legislature somewhere is going to pass a pet custody act at some point. So
why not? You push your dog around Walmart in a stroller.
Okay, it is June 8th, 2014, and I, Carl Rominger, declare that sometime within the next 5 years, a state legislature will pass a dog, cat, or other animal custody act, so that people can determine, and somebody's going to call us up in a minute and probably say, there's actually one on the books already in such and such state. But yeah, can you imagine? And then pretty soon you're going to be suing for pain and suffering when your dog gets hit, I don't know. I got so mad with this Katrina thing when people were saying they didn't save all the dogs, and I was like, they didn't save all the people. Let's kind of prioritize our problems, and when there's another natural disaster and all the people are gotten out safely, then I will start worrying about the cats and the dogs. But that's just me. I'm not in love with cats and dogs.
What a crazy, insane culture we live in, if you think about it.
Oh, Americans spend...
I always think about it earlier when Dwayne was saying about, things used to be a lot better back in the day, and they're getting bad now. And I always, when people say things like, well, this thing's getting bad, I think, you can't even imagine what it would have been like to live 100 years ago. You'd have had to saddle up the horse after you fed him, washed him. Just imagine the amount of work that was involved in your daily life. The amount of work that's involved in your daily life now. And you're going to cry?
Have you ever ridden a horse?
They're getting bad, they're getting better.
Don, you ever ride a horse?
I have, yeah.
Okay, right. So before you put the saddle on that thing, right, contrary to the Hollywood imagery of a horse, as you know, but for some of you out there who still, I don't know, think that horses are these clean, beautiful animals, the first thing they do, besides rolling in their own poop, is sleep in it, right? And so by the time it's time to ride your horse, the first thing you have to do is brush the crap and the dirt off of them. Otherwise, the saddle will grind all that into them, and your horse will be not too good to ride in a few days anyhow. So you have to clean the horse for 20 minutes before you can even put the damn saddle on. Then it takes 20 more minutes to put the saddle, the bridle, and all the gear on it. I mean, people complain about starting their car and having to brush the snow off.
It's ridiculous. I know we're a bunch of sissies. It's really unbelievable how soft and weak we've become.
On the other hand, you didn't have so much to do back in those days too. So, like in the middle of the winter when the crop was in, or the crop was already harvested and you really didn't have much to do, I guess having something to do was better than nothing, just sitting around. I don't know what they did back. That's what, actually I know what they did do. That's why they used to have, and I don't think this is a coincidence. They used to have church services, for instance, in the colonies that would go on for a day, And the reason was there was no TV. It wasn't like you needed to get home to catch a baseball game or something like that. Well, you might as well sit around and sing carols and have a religious ceremony, because what else was there to do besides farm?
That explains the Great Awakening altogether, right there.
Or fend off Indians or anything like that.
Oh, yeah. There was that, too. I mean, it wasn't exactly the safest place to live.
I have a theory about that with the old Wild West, too, which was, the rhythm of life was very slow, and then there'd be a gunfight, and everything happened in 13 seconds, and then back to really slow again, because, again, you just weren't doing things at lightning speeds. Can you imagine? Now, think about this. Back in those days, anyone get in the conversation, 717-916-5189. People would actually, learn that their mother died, 6 months after they died. And sometimes family would send a letter, right? Because the son's off, he goes over to France, but the boat taking the letter gets waylaid, and then he leaves France and goes somewhere else, and then the letter doesn't catch up to him. So the letter's been out, for 6 months, and the guy's sailing home, and it misses him. It's a year later, and he comes home just to find out, oh, let me show you where your mother's grave is, because you didn't know. You didn't know your mother died. So you would travel in those days, and travel took a long time, and then you would come home, and one of your family members would be dead, and something else significant would have your sister might have been impregnated and had a baby in the year and a half that you were gone, and you didn't even know she was married when you left. It's
an amazing time that we live in.
Yeah, the way information flowed in those days and how you assembled it had to be so much different. Now people are pissed. I mean, they get mad because they'll be like, my dad was in the hospital and my sister took him there and she didn't call me. Like, well, when did she call you? Like an hour after he was there. And you're like, and they're like just livid that they weren't immediately informed. And you're like, okay, I understand, because that's our standard now. But it's so different than how the world used to work. I mean, remember landlines?
Sure, I do, yeah. I remember party lines.
Oh, I had a party line as a little kid. Yeah.
My dad grew up in Centerville. I don't know if you know what that is, but at the time it was pretty rural. It's not far from Carlisle. And their whole town had a party line. I guess everybody kind of shared. It was like a communist thing. Like everybody shared the phone line. But you could pick that phone line up at any time, and you could hear someone else's conversation. Everybody was sharing the phone line. Right.
Yeah, Dwayne, by the way, just he predicts 2018 for marrying of animals. So
marrying animals.
That goes with the whole theory of why everybody thinks.
They always have inheritance rights, don't they?
Yes, in fact, well, a lot of people think that that's the whole gay marriage thing is.
Right. It's going to lead to.
It's going to lead to bestiality, and it's going to lead.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see it. I don't see it, but then again, some European country probably would be the first to declare.
I'm going to guess like Greece or. It's a Mediterranean kind of thing.
Ooh, boy. I won't go there. I'm afraid of those guys.
I'm sorry.
I'm afraid of those guys. I don't want to be drowned in the Mediterranean. But seriously, that the way our communications have changed. So I want to come back because I'm going to tie this full circle. And I'm bemoaning, the comparison of Obama to Hitler and this meme floating on the internet. But as I think about it, I'm also reminded, that they basically, in the yellow journalism during the first American elections, used to write terrible, scandalous things about each other. And all kinds of insinuations were made and just scandalous, terrible things said about politicians that by today's standards, we would, I used to joke they would like kind of write an article where they basically suggest the guy has a venereal disease. And, wink, wink, nod, nod, you might sort of make a Clinton-Monica joke or, like, oh, I wonder that guy. But we don't have that kind of raw discourse necessarily anymore either, where it would be acceptable for a major newspaper to suggest that the president has a venereal disease. You know what I mean? It just wouldn't fly in our day and age per se. So I'm not really sure we're any rougher or cruder than anybody was in history. We may just change the fine points of how we do it. So maybe it's not that much different. I mean, maybe it's always been the American way to argue that somebody else is subhuman and terrible, horrible, evil person, because that's how politics has always worked. So maybe it's not. Maybe nothing's really changed, and we don't need to worry that much about it. I don't know. Just a potential thesis.
Well, we certainly aren't getting smarter when people think Obama is like Hitler. You know what I mean? We're not getting smarter, that's for sure.
Right.
Did you ever hear the band Devo?
Yeah.
And how it was based on like the concept of de-evolution?
Mm-hmm.
I always think that's kind of possibly true in this country. We're moving backwards. We're going backwards in some respects.
Well, and it's very possible for society to go backwards, by the way. Let this be a lesson to everybody. I know a guy who was married in Kandahar, okay? And when he was married in Kandahar in the 1960s, it was in a 5-star hotel. Now think about that. In the 1960s, the city of Kandahar in Afghanistan had a 5-star hotel in it. It now has no copper pipe in almost all the city, okay? An entire city has been raided, looted, and destroyed because all those trappings of Western civilization, so to speak, or all those trappings of civilization, as their economy collapsed and they moved into warlord stuff, there's no law anymore, so there's nobody to protect your property. This goes back to your regulations, Don. If you can find something of value, you cart it off. And so, and all the basic services have dried up. And then they have no highways and no interstates and no anything. But they had all of that at one point. And it wasn't...
That's what happens when you let theocratic gun nuts take over your country.
Well, I'll take theocratic and nut, and maybe even gun nut. But that's actually why a theocracy, particularly a more backward theocracy... But there's tons of bad decisions like that. China had a change in leadership at one point, and they had these treasure fleets. And about 100 years before Columbus was sailing around the world, the Chinese treasure fleets were busily bringing all kinds of goodies back and forth to Africa and trading with Madagascar. And then they had a big political change in China, and the new emperor wrecked all the shipyards and burned all the boats because basically they were the vestiges of the guy before him. And there was some, belief that this was wrong or bad or something. But they always say now that if the Chinese had not burned their treasure fleets, they would have discovered the New World well ahead of us, and they would have been the ones who created the giant navigable shipping routes, which led to the European dominance. So the
slaves would have been Indonesian instead of African.
Correct. Well, right, and so it's very fascinating, only in the sense that. A country can devolve very rapidly when you don't have the right political structures in place. And the right political structures seem to be, in my opinion, central governments with strong mandates, but also respect for freedom and not theocracies who are prone to overreaching, because you can't. The problem with a theocracy is you can't question anything, right? If it's the word of God, it's immutable, and so
right.
So once, even if there is God's law and natural law, you've always got to operate under man's law, or else because the minute the detailed laws or the day-to-day laws become God's laws, then it's impossible to mutate them to solve the situation. So a common legal structure you see here in the United States and other places, we'll say it's the law of man and it's the law of God, and the way it comes down to the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. Then you pass man's laws. Well, if somebody wants to dispute one of man's laws, you can always say it violates right to life, liberty, or happiness, or one of these fundamental God-given rights. But that's a semantics game, and it's a fight about whether this law does or doesn't. But you can have that fight because you're not questioning God's law, you're questioning man's law. And so having a secular law, even if it's backed up by a religious law, is extremely important because it removes it adds mutability to the law, which creates for a stronger society, because no matter what anybody says, any law written at one time is never always, it's not one shoe fits all forever. There's a few basic ones like thou shalt not kill, but even thou shalt not kill isn't that clear, because last I checked, we still tell soldiers they can kill, and last I checked, they can still kill in self-defense. So even thou shalt not kill, as simple as it sounds, has a lot of room for interpretation and implementation.
Yeah, which comes down to the fact that the Ten Commandments aren't really that solid as a rule, as a group of rules to run a country.
No.
Only six of them apply to like actual laws, and therefore about how you worship your God.
Yeah, and you could even say, though, that the Ten Commandments represent some higher body of law. Well, it's great, but the higher body of law still needs to be implemented in a way that actually works in any particular era. So thou shalt not kill. The flexibility on who you can and can't kill may change over time, but the general precept that it's not good to kill, or it's not the best option to kill, probably would be your overarching precept. But when you say, for instance, that it is a sin and you'll be damned to hell for trimming the hairs on the side of your face, well, how does a law like that become flexible in any way? If you either do it or you don't, right? It's God ordained or He didn't.
Which is in the Bible, by the way, for you people who hold a Bible when you're yelling at gay people but don't actually look in it.
Right, because Leviticus
It's in Leviticus. That's one of those.
For some reason, we don't have to follow Leviticus anymore, except for certain parts of it.
Well, the one about being homosexual.
Yeah.
That one. But all the other ones, no, we don't want to pay attention to that.
Right, that one's clear. So
I saw somewhere there's 75 laws in Leviticus.
Yeah, I would, and then most of them result in stoning or death. They were very harsh in those days. Yeah, very harsh in those
divorce.
days.
There's divorce.
Well, Don, I'm
wrapping
this show up for tonight, my friend. So I'm gonna let you go, and I'm gonna get the hell off the air. Okay.
Good night, Carl.
All right, man. Take care. Yeah, that was pretty good. Thank you, Don. I appreciate it. I don't mean to boot you off, but next Wednesday, 717-916-5189, I'll get you guys on the air. If you enjoyed the show, be sure and share it on Facebook. When you're on the Spreaker, if you watch on the Spreaker function, it's really easy to share it on Facebook or Twitter. If you guys keep sharing the show, we'll keep building our call volume, and we'll see where it goes. All right, take care. Have a good night, and I'll see you later.